Hey, everybody. Thank you for waiting. We were a little bit delayed, but here we are. Glad you're here tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night chat. Should be a good conversation. So let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Hope you had a lovely weekend. We certainly did at CPI, and I can tell you more about what happened, but we're doing great stuff here. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation following our normal format, which is first, I give my opening remarks. Then after that, we do a roll call, and then I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if you've got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, best thing to do is go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin, send your question. And somebody already did. Christine, whoever that is, right? I assume she's someone who watches the program regularly. She sent a question, and hers will be the first to be answered. So if you got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. We also accept Rumble rants. If you're on the Rumble, you want to send a Rumble rant, that works. And on top of that, you can cash at me at Caleb Maupin 22. Now, as far as announcements, tomorrow night is going to be a big night for our community. Very big night for our community because we're going to be having the first session of the Juche study group. Juche is the ideology of North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un. And we're having a study session led by Noah, who's the founder of the American Juche Study Group, and it's open. The link is open. So if you have a webcam and you want to come on and join the session with us, you can watch it. It'll be live on this channel. It'll be live on the Center for Political Innovation channel, and there'll be some interesting guests will be joining us, and we will be studying the Juche ideology led by Noah Schenk of the Center for Political Innovation. He is the founder of the study group. So please join us and join us live. Turn your webcam on. If you've got a copy of the textbook, the new textbook that we published, bring it with you. And it's going to be every Tuesday. We'll be having a Juche study group. So that's very exciting. So I hope that you will join us tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for the first session of the American Juche Study Group. That is the big announcement. So tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern, don't miss it. Now, other than that, we're just going to have a normal live stream following our normal format. So quick reminder, if you got a question, you can send your question via Rumble Rant, Cash App 22, but the best, Caleb Maupin 22 on the Cash App, best way to send your question is buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. And then you don't have to do it while we're live. You can do it tomorrow. You can do it the next day, etc. So there you go. The textbook is available wherever books are sold. You just give them the title. It's got broader distribution. It's on Amazon if you want to pick it up on Amazon. If you order it now, it might arrive on time, right? If you got Amazon Prime, but the new textbook is available wherever books are sold. It's called Juche for American Workers. Here, I'll just hold up my copy of it. Now this is the textbook we'll be using for the Juche study group. Very neat, right? Juche for American Workers. And that's what we'll be studying tomorrow night. Noah will be leading the study group. He's the editor of this new compilation of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il's writings. And we'll be studying tomorrow night. So be on this channel or on the CPI YouTube channel, 10 p.m. Turn on your webcam and join the study group. It's going to be a lot of fun. So that's a reminder there. And so, tonight, tonight, in terms of announcements, I already mentioned the Juche reading group that we're doing, and a lot has happened. But I don't know if you saw, but Donald Trump is continuing to threaten to completely destroy Iran. That is the latest. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and Iran says they fired on some U.S. ships. They said they fired warning shots first, and those warning shots were ignored. The ships got closer and closer, and Iran had no choice. They fired on the ships. Now, the Pentagon has a very, very different version of events. According to the Pentagon, they just shot at the Iranian ships and eradicated and destroyed them. The Pentagon is saying a lot of odd things. Trump is claiming that Iran has no navy at this point, which that is not true. Iran does have a navy. And, meanwhile, there are 15,000 U.S. troops that have been deployed to the Middle East region. The whole situation is very volatile. And the USA claims that it's going to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says no way in hell will that happen, and that they consider themselves to be a superpower as well. And Iran is just kind of facing down the United States and saying, no, you will not open up the Strait of Hormuz. You bombed and murdered the supreme leader of Iran, and you have murdered school children at Manab High School at Manab. They murdered these school children, these schoolgirls, and you have launched a completely unprovoked attack. This is the second time that Iran has been bombed and ruthlessly attacked at the same time they're engaged in negotiations. And so Iran says this strait is going to remain closed. That is Iran's position. The U.S. economy is screaming right now because of that. I don't know if you saw, but Spirit Airlines went under. A major airline, probably the cheapest airline that a lot of people fly for domestic U.S. flights, went under. Spirit Airlines is no more. And that had a lot to do with the fact that the gas prices are now through the roof, and that they specialize in cheap flights. And now flights are not so cheap because the gas prices are rising, and we lost an airline. And that's just the beginning, folks. The price of food is rising. The price of everything is going up. When the price of gasoline goes up, everything goes up, because of what Jimmy Hoffa famously said: if you bought it, a truck brought it. So if you buy anything at a store, it was delivered in a truck, and so that truck has gas, and the cost is going up. This is a situation that is going to really have a big impact on the world. Now, I showed this video once before. It's a video produced by Press TV, which is the English language network of Iran. I'm going to show it again because they go into great detail about why this strait being closed, which Iran is doing, this is going to affect all of us. This has a really, really big impact on the world economy. And this is basically, Iran is on strike, right? When there's a picket line, when workers are on strike, they block people from going into the business because they say, look, if this business isn't going to treat us fairly, we don't want, not only are we not going to work there, but we're going to block people from going in. We're going to set up a picket line. A picket line means do not cross. And that's what Iran is doing. Iran says, you bombed us and you killed our spiritual leader. You blew up an elementary school and killed over 150 elementary aged girls. You blew up you killed all kinds of civilians. So we are putting the world economy on halt until we get some justice here, until we get what we want. And we are demanding that U.S. troops leave the region. We're demanding that Israel stop killing the Palestinians. We're demanding compensation for the ruthless murder of our civilians and our elected officials and our leader and our supreme leader, our spiritual leader. And Iran is on strike. They've got a picket line and they're holding up the world economy. And it makes sense. Would any country not do the same thing, right? Imagine if some other country were to attack the United States, kill a whole bunch of our people, murder our elected officials, our highest, most well-respected religious leaders and elected and government people. Wouldn't the USA take dramatic action to demand that something be done? And the Strait of Hormuz is an area that Iran has a lot of control over, and you'll see that in the video. And so they're holding up the world economy until they get their demands. And Europe is certainly furious with Trump over this, and they didn't agree to this war. And this is a crazy situation. And now Trump is doubling down on threats that he's going to open up the strait. And yeah, this is the Strait of Hormuz. This is the Strait of Hormuz that we all need to know about. So here we go. Here we go. This is the important video on the Strait of Hormuz.
American writer Mark Twain once quipped,
God created war so that Americans would learn geography.
and in 2026, they seem to be learning it the hard way. So far, they've discovered that 10,900 kilometers from Washington, D.C. lies the world's most critical choke point, a narrow strip of water between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman that stretches 167 kilometers in length, narrows to just 34 kilometers at its tightest point, and carries roughly 30,000 vessels a year. It's called the Strait of Hormuz. Every single normal day, around a fifth of the world's traded oil and LNG flows through this corridor. Most of that oil heads to Asia, but oil prices don't respect geography. They're set globally, so when West Asia sneezes, fuel prices spike everywhere. Oil is only the start. Over 30% of global ammonia trade, nearly half of urea, and 20% of diammonium phosphate, key fertilizer inputs, move through this same choke point, along with about half the world's sulfur for metal processing.
The sulfur didn't arrive, the factory was shut down. It didn't arrive because of the war, and because the Strait of Hormuz was closed.
Unlike oil, these can't be rerouted. There are no pipelines for ammonia or urea. If Hormuz closes, the nitrogen supply chain doesn't slow, it stops. And since synthetic nitrogen fertilizers support roughly 48% of the global population, missing the mid-April application window in the Northern Hemisphere means lower yields by September. It's that simple and that brutal. Major importers like India, Brazil, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and many African countries would quickly face fertilizer shortages, leading to higher food prices, inflation, and a widespread food security crisis affecting billions.
85% of Brazil's fertilizer is imported, and under these conditions, we can only bring part of the land under cultivation.
Meanwhile, about a third of the world's helium, critical for semiconductors and MRIs, passes through the strait. So does nearly 10% of global aluminum and a significant share of Persian Gulf-produced plastics. Even the Persian Gulf states themselves are exposed. This passage is their food lifeline. The biggest one, Saudi Arabia, imports over 80% of its food. The smallest one, Qatar, 85%.
If the strait stays closed for another month or two, the food situation here is going to get really critical.
If anyone thinks the so-called First World would be immune, the reality says otherwise. Since the war began, Brent crude has swung from $73 to nearly $120 at one point, adding about 500 million euros per day in EU energy costs. In late April, the IEA warned Europe may have only 6 weeks of jet fuel left as West Asian imports falter. Prices have surged past $1,500 per ton. The IEA calls this
is the greatest energy crisis in history.
By April 22nd, Lufthansa had canceled 20,000 flights, with more disruptions and price hikes expected. In Germany, the industrial heart of Europe, 78.6% of firms report uncertainty about their future, rising to 87.7% in manufacturing and over 90% in chemicals, rubber, and plastics. The U.S. isn't insulated either. Gas prices jumped more than $1 per gallon in just 6 weeks, surpassing $4.10, the highest level since 2022, while the Hormuz shock fuels inflation.
They said the consumer price index rose 0.9% in March, almost 1% in just 1 month. I haven't seen a jump like that in years.
Meanwhile, a Reuters/Ipsos poll put Trump's approval rating at 36%, its lowest since his return to office. 48 hours into the Iran war, marine insurers began canceling war risk coverage in the Persian Gulf. By March 5th, commercial insurance had effectively vanished. No insurance means no shipping. No shipping means no trade. This isn't a new insight. Back in 1507, Portuguese Admiral Afonso de Albuquerque understood that
whoever controls this choke point controls the flow between India and the Mediterranean.
And by extension, global trade itself. So far, the largest empire in history finds itself with remarkably little to say against one of the oldest. Perhaps this time, The Americans picked the wrong country to learn geography.
Yeah, that is the reality of the situation. So I was on TV today on RT reporting on the latest developments that I just went over with Trump making these threats. There's supposed to be a press conference tomorrow morning with Pete Hegseth and Dan Kane, who's the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this is my reporting today.
Donald Trump has warned that he will destroy Iran if it attacks any vessel in the U.S. operation to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Those comments regarding the so-called Project Freedom were reported by the American media network Fox News.
I spoke with President Trump for 20 minutes about the situation with Iran. He talked about Project Freedom and the U.S. efforts to guide vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, issuing a new warning to the Iranian regime, saying if the Iranians try to target U.S. ships in this area, they will be, quote, blown off the face of the earth.
Well, we have Donald Trump now doubling down on his earlier threats to completely destroy the Islamic Republic of Iran. The stakes are certainly getting higher. Now, Iran says that it opened fire on multiple U.S. warships in the Strait of Hormuz and that they fired warning shots first. They've released images showing those warning shots that were indeed fired, that the American vessels proceeded right into their crosshairs. They had really no choice. The American vessels were not paying attention to any of the orders that were given to stand down, to change course. Now, Washington gives a completely different version of events. According to the U.S. Central Command, that there were no warning shots, there was no confrontation. The USA struck first and completely took out and obliterated the Iranian vessels. That's the American version of events. They say the U.S. military has the clear advantage. Now, Iran says it has total control over the Strait of Hormuz, that no commercial ships or oil tankers are going through it. And we also heard Iran making clear that they consider their country to be a superpower. Here's what Iran had to say.
What is clear is that the world neither accepts the United States' humanitarian claims nor believes that the US can escape this self-created quagmire, which has caused numerous problems for our region, for the United States itself, and for the international community by repeating past mistakes. By now, Americans should have learned that they cannot use the language of intimidation and coercion when dealing with the Iranian nation. The Islamic Republic of Iran has demonstrated that it considers itself the guardian and protector of the Strait of Hormuz and this vital passage. The events that occurred in recent weeks are a direct result of the military aggression by the United States and the Zionist regime against Iran. Up until that point, the Strait of Hormuz had been a safe and secure route for international shipping without any problems.
Now, those are bold words from the Iranian foreign minister. Donald Trump referred to war on Iran as being, quote, a mini war.
I call it a mini war because that's all they are. They don't have a navy anymore. Think of it. They had 159 ships. How many do they have left, Kelly? Zero.
Interesting choice of words. We have the United States announcing Project Freedom, which is intended to break the chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. Now, that comes, we've got 15,000 U.S. troops that are now piling into the region. We've got a fleet of guided missile destroyers and specialized minesweepers. We've got 100 plus U.S. military aircraft that are in the area, as well as drones that are sweeping for underwater mines. The aircraft of the United States are engaging in round-the-clock surveillance. This is the U.S. Military Central Command explaining their operations.
U.S. Navy guided missile destroyers are currently operating in the Arabian Gulf after transients the Strait of Hormuz in support of Project Freedom. American forces are actively assisting efforts to restore transit.
Yeah, so, you know, that's the situation, and our economy is screaming. This is hurting American jobs. This is hurting American workers, and this is the fault of Israel, and it is the fault of corrupt leaders and globalist, imperialist factions within our elite that are committed to destroying Iran, committed to maintaining their dominance over the global economy. And this is not in the interest of the American people. And if you are a true American patriot, you must oppose this war. Iran is not our enemy. Our enemy is Wall Street. Our enemy is London. Our enemy is the international bankers and big monopolies that are grinding this country into poverty and driving down our wages and our living standards. And this war must be opposed. This war must absolutely be opposed. And that's why the Center for Political Innovation has been in the streets loudly opposing this war and saying our real enemy is at home, and that this is an unjust war waged by the big monopolies and the bankers who are grinding our country into poverty. And it's that simple. And that to be a true American patriot means to oppose this war. To truly stand up for Americans' working families means to say that Iran has a common enemy and is our ally against globalism, imperialism. It's that simple. We must, at this point, say Iran is not our enemy. Wall Street is our enemy, and that Iran is part of the rising new world around, that is broken out of imperialism. So that's our perspective, and we're going to beat that drum over and over and over again, and we will not waver, and we will not compromise. We will not surrender on that point, right? Anti-imperialism is what it's all about. And today is May 4th. And May 4th is particularly important to me and to anti-imperialism for a couple reasons. For me in particular, and for anti-imperialism in general, today is the anniversary of a horrendous event that happened in the year of 1970. Very close to where I grew up, too. I was born in 1987. 17 years before I was born, in the year of 1970, a number of college students were protesting the Vietnam War at Kent State University in Ohio. And the National Guard was sent in to oppose the protests. And they opened fire and they killed 4 college students. 2 of them were activists. One of them was a local girl named Allison Krauss, who was from Ohio, was a local Ohio girl, German-American, had gotten involved in Students for a Democratic Society and the Maoist communist movement. And she was protesting and she was shot and killed. Another was a guy named Jeffrey Miller, who was a guy who came from a Communist Party family. His mother had been in the Communist Party USA. He was studying at Kent State University. He was against the Vietnam War, and he was attending the protest. He was from Brooklyn, New York, studying at Kent State University in Ohio, and he was gunned down and he was killed. 2 other students were killed who were not part of the protest. They were hit by stray bullets. And it was a horrendous event where 4 students were shot and killed at Kent State University in Ohio. And 2 days later, there was a peaceful protest that happened at Jackson State University in Mississippi. And 2 students were killed there. 2 days later, the police opened fire. It was state troopers opened fire on the protest and killed 2 protesters at that demonstration. It was a horrendous moment in American history where the population was very much against the Vietnam War. Those college students, white college students who didn't want to be drafted and were increasingly alienated from U.S. society, were getting involved in radicalism. And the Black community in particular was very, very much furious about racism. There had been 1968, there had been a wave of urban rebellions. And so May of 1970, you had 4 white college students, 2 of whom were leftist activists, were shot and killed. 2 of them were just randomly on the campus, hit by stray bullets, were killed. And then 2 days later at Jackson State University, the Black students of Jackson State University in Mississippi were protesting. I guess what had been happening at Jackson State University was that originally Jackson State University was whites only. It was for white people only because it was a Jim Crow segregation. But in the early 60s, that was gotten rid of by the Civil Rights Act. And so Black students started attending Jackson State University in Mississippi. And racists would drive by the university in their cars. And if they saw a Black student walking into the college, they would shout the N-word. They would throw things at them. A lot of the local white people in Jackson, Mississippi were really angry that Black students were attending Jackson State University. And so among the Black students, there was a Black Power organization. I think it was like the Black Student Union had been formed, which was inspired by the Black Panthers. And when they heard about the massacre at Kent State University 2 days before, they called a protest and they organized their protest. It was a peaceful demonstration that they had organized. There was allegedly somebody had thrown a rock or something like that, but the state troopers had guns. These black students were protesting at Jackson State University, and the state troopers opened fire on them, and 2 students were killed. This was a horrendous moment in American history, May 4th of 1970. And it was a particularly interest to me because I grew up about 15, 20 minutes away from Kent State University. And every year, and again, I was a kid, I was born 17 years after this happened. So, this was well before my time. But every year in my little town, when I was in junior high, when I was in elementary school, 5th and 6th grade, I remember this, 5th and 6th grade, when I was in junior high, when I was in high school, I would have a teacher or somebody in my town say, oh, today is the anniversary. This is May 4th. And those students deserved it. They deserved to get killed because they were disrespecting our troops. They were disrespecting our country. They were disrespecting the military. Every year I would hear this from somebody, right? Whether it was a teacher, whether it was somebody whose parents, a lot of kids at my school, had parents who were of that generation, just like I did. Every year I would hear this. Somebody would say, well, those kids were disrespecting America. They were disrespecting the country. They deserved to die. I would hear this every year. I would hear this. And it's kind of funny because this happened long before I was born, but that's trauma. That's trauma, right? And what that's about is that in my little town, a lot of a number, I shouldn't say a lot, but a number of the National Guard troops who were at Kent State University were from my town. And there were a number of people in my town who witnessed the events. Maybe they didn't open fire, but they were from the area and they were horrified, right? Because here, there are 4 college kids that were peacefully, 2 were peacefully protesting, 2 weren't even doing anything. They were just in the area and they died. And so the way that these people were trying to reassure themselves that it was okay was they had invented this narrative where these students were spitting on soldiers and they were against America and they were dirty hippies and the reason that they were repeating it, and me, who was born 17 years after it happened, and kids my age would repeat it because they'd heard it from their parents. I had teachers who said this, was because they were traumatized by this event, right? To hear about this. And the fact there were people in my town who witnessed it, who were National Guardsmen or were attending Kent State University. And they were traumatized by it. And so they were dealing with it. And their way of dealing with it as conservatives, as, right-wing conservative nationalists, was to say, well, it was okay because these students were bad people. There was one guy in my town who actually talked about, he was a student at Kent State University at the time, and he had nothing to do with the protests. And after the 4 students were killed, they canceled classes for the rest of the semester. School was over. And that was nationally, I believe, in 1970. All universities shut down after May 4th. It was almost the end of the semester. And when the massacre happened at Kent State, all the colleges shut down. People, got out of school early, basically. The semester ended early across America. But this one guy in my town, I remember, he came home and I remember hearing this story. He was not part of the protests or anything. He came home and his windows had been thrown out by bricks. Bricks had been thrown through his windows. And the reason was that people in my town had heard he went to Kent State University and they were angry about how there had been protests there. And so some local, right-wing patriots in my town had thrown bricks through his windows simply because he went to Kent State University. And he said, I didn't have anything to do with the protests at all. I just happened to, go to Kent State University. And when school shut down and I went home and went to my house, all the windows were busted out because everyone was fired up and angry. It was a very, very crazy incident. And, every year they would have a commemorative ceremony. And when I was in college, I started going to the commemorative ceremony at Kent State University. And I would hear people's testimony about what they saw. And, there's a statue that has a bullet hole through it at Kent State University. It's pretty wild story. So I just wanted to talk about that. But there's another thing related to May 4th, right? Which has happened on the other side of the planet a lot earlier. May 4th, 1919 was a pivotal date in Chinese history. May 4th was the uprising that happened in China after World War I. After World War I, China was on the winning side. China was on the side of America and Britain and France. and they won. They were on the winning side of World War I. And the Germans had seized parts of China before World War I. And so China was hoping they would get their territory back. And when World War I ended, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson gave the German territories of China to Japan and to France and to other countries. And China didn't get their territory back. The Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I didn't give China their territory back, even though they'd been on the same side of World War I as the winners. And they thought, okay, now that, the Germans have lost, the chunks of Germany that have been seized, the chunks of China that have been seized by Germany, we're going to get them back. The chunks of China that have been, and they didn't get them back. And there was anger all across China. So all over China, there was an uprising where students went out and burned anything associated with America and with England. And it was called the May 4th Uprising. And Japan. They burned anything associated with Japan. They burned down stores that sold Japanese products. It was the May 4th Uprising in China of 1919. And it was a really big moment. And out of that uprising, you had what was called the May 4th movement, which was a wave of anti-imperialism in China that paved the way for the eventual Chinese Revolution. And it was in China's major cities. It was college students, largely college and university students, who were angry about the way China was, screwed and badly treated by the Western countries, in particular America, but also Japan, which is not a Western country, but was a colonizer, and also the British. And they went out and they destroyed symbols associated with, associated with American imperialism. They burned stores that imported and sold Japanese products. They went out and rebelled. There was a huge rebellion in China's major cities led by university students. Well, at the center of the rebellion, there was an organization that was described as a cult, and it was called the New People's Study Society. New People's Study Society was this cult, they called it. I mean, I don't think that's a fair way to describe it, but that's what people described it as. There was this guy named Mao Zedong, who was the leader of something called the New People's Study Society. And to be a member of the New People's Study Society, you had to not have sex. You had to be chaste like a monk. You couldn't have sex. Men and women were equal in the New People's Study Society. And it was majority women, I believe, at the time in 1919. It was majority female members. You had to have pledged to not have sex to be part of it. They followed the teachings of Peter Kropotkin, the Russian anarchist. And they were just this big group centered around this intellectual, this thinker, this librarian named Mao Zedong. And they were at the universities. And when the rebellion happened, at the center of the rebellion was the New People's Study Group, which was this little group led by this guy named Mao. And they were at the center of the May 4th movement and the May 4th rebellion. And people saw that they were the most disciplined organization. They knew how to organize the protest. They told people where to go. Afterwards, for months, they organized pickets of any store that sold Japanese products so that round the clock, no one could go into these stores. And these stores had to stop selling Japanese products or else they would go out of business. And it was a very disciplined organization led by this college librarian named Mao Zedong, who grew up in the countryside in Hunan. It was from a rural area, and he was the leader. He was this college librarian, and he had this group that you had to pledge to never have sex to be a member of, and it was majority women, which back then women were not supposed to be in politics, right? Women in China, that was not the traditional culture, said women shouldn't be politically active. A lot of the people in the group were runaways. A lot of these women, they had been forced into an arranged marriage by their father. And they didn't want to get married, so they ran away to the city and were like homeless beggars, and they joined Mao's New People's Study Society. You can read all about it in The Morning Deluge. This is a great biography of Mao Zedong. It's about Mao before the revolution by Han Suyin. And she tells the story of the New People's Study Society, which was the foundation of what eventually became the Chinese Communist Party. After the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, they learned about the Soviet Union. They chucked Kropotkinist anarchism, and they adopted Marxism-Leninism. They merged into the Communist Party when it was formed. And that May 4th movement of 1919 was a really, really important moment in the history of China. So May 4th is a pretty important day if you are an anti-imperialist. If you're an anti-imperialist in America, it's the anniversary of the Kent State Massacre. If you're an anti-imperialist in China, it's the anniversary of a rebellion that sparked, that led to China's eventual revolution. So May 4th is an important day. And I just wanted to share that with all of you. And, we had a lot going on. We had a great protest here in New York City on Saturday, and I'm going to show the video. I've already posted the video. We were protesting against George Orwell, and we had an event afterwards with speeches. Noah gave a great presentation about who George Orwell was, a lot of history. I gave a follow-up talk, and many of our members, Briggy gave a great remarks, Irving, and Paul. We just had a number of our members got up to the podium, and we had just an amazing, spirited political meeting in New York City. So I'll be editing the video of that. That'll be posted soon. We got a lot going on. But tonight, I said that, the slideshows that I do on the history of anti-imperialism are very, very important. So, and I have set out, I have like a list of slideshows to do on these streams. For an organizational reason that I won't get into. I did the first one. It's called From Marx to Lenin. I posted that, and it's quite popular. People really learned a lot from my slideshow, From Marx to Lenin. So now we're going to have another slideshow. This is slideshow number 2 in that series that I'm doing for an organizational purpose, right? And this slideshow, this is called, I guess I'll upload, I'll show you tonight's slideshow. We're going to do a slideshow. After tonight's slideshow, we'll open it up for questions. But tonight's slideshow is Trotsky versus Stalin, or Stalin versus Trotsky. We'll see. Yeah, it's Stalin versus Trotsky, a debate that nobody understands. So just a reminder, if you have a question for me to answer in the second half of our show, by all means, please send a buy me a coffee. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Send your question. Christine has already done it. John has already done it. I'll be answering questions in the second half of the show. Rumble rants also work. You can cash at me at Caleb Maupin 22. Also, please remember that tomorrow night is going to be a really, really important night for our community. It'll be the first study session of the Juche study group. And that link is open. If you want to come on this channel and discuss Juche ideology with us, you can. Noah Shank is the leader of the Juche study group and the founder of the American Juche study group. And we'll be using this book that he put together called Juche for American Workers. This is the textbook, volume 1. And we're going to start every Tuesday night having Juche study group meetings on this YouTube channel, live streamed. The studio link is open. So as long as you've got a web camera, you are welcome to join. Come on in and join us tomorrow night for the Juche study group. There's the link with all the information, the studio link, etc. So with no further ado, right? Remember the Juche study meeting tomorrow night. Join us. So with no further ado, I am going to do another slideshow. I'm going to do another slideshow tonight. So here we go. Stalin versus Trotsky, a debate nobody understands. Why did I call it a debate nobody understands? Because everywhere I ever hear this debate discussed, it's misrepresented. If you take American history, this is a debate you can't not talk about. 2 vitally important people. Joseph Stalin, born in 1878, leader of the Soviet Union when it industrialized, when it defeated the Nazis in World War II, when communism spread as a global movement in the aftermath of World War II, died in 1953. Leon Trotsky, revolutionary intellectual, joined the Bolshevik Party, the first foreign minister of the Soviet Union, eventually went into exile, was eventually killed, assassinated in 1940. These are 2 figures that you can't not talk about. If you're going to talk about modern history, you can't not talk about Stalin. You can't not talk about Trotsky. However, so because people that don't know anything about communism talk about it, they have to explain what the disagreement was, and none of them understand it. It was not about democracy. That's a common misconception. The movie Animal Farm, the stupid George Orwell, piece makes it about democracy, right? That Trotsky, who's represented by one character, Snowball, he wanted freedom and democracy, but Napoleon, represents Stalin, the evil pig, wanted authoritarian. That's not what it's about. And we will show that's not what it was about. It was not about upholding Lenin. Both Trotsky and Stalin considered themselves to be inheritors of Lenin's legacy. They had both been members of the Bolshevik Party. And in a lot of ways, Trotsky had fought with Lenin and strayed from his teachings. And you could argue that in some ways, Stalin did as well. They both had their own interpretation of Lenin's ideas, but they both considered themselves to be Lenin's inheritor. So that's not what it was about. Also, it was not about Judaism versus Christianity. And you hear that now. Unfortunately, there is a layer of people who think, well, Trotsky was Jewish and Stalin was from a Christian background. But that's true. That is true. But that's not what the disagreement was about. So tonight we're going to talk about what the disagreement between Stalin and Trotsky was really about. And we're going to explain it once and for all. So here we go. Now, Joseph Stalin, right, he was born Joseph Zhugashvili, and he was from Georgia. And Georgia is a nationality that was part of the Russian Empire at the time. And he was from a rural village called Gori. His father was a boot maker, a guy who made boots for a living. And Stalin's father was a bit of an alcoholic and didn't get along with his mother. His mother had a lot of miscarriages. She made a promise to God, if I can actually give birth to a son, I would like to make my son a priest. After Stalin was born, after little Stalin was born, Stalin's mother, who was really kind of, she's described as like a go personality. Stalin's mother was just somebody who was just relentless, right? You read any biography of Stalin, positive or negative, they talk about his mother was just this very, very active personality. And his mother went around raising money to send her son, her only son, to seminary school because she wanted him to become a priest. She had made a promise to God, if you let me have a son, I will make him a priest. So to do it, she raised the money. It was not cheap to go to seminary school, but she raised the money and she did it. So Stalin went to seminary school. And in the seminary school, he was very much looked down upon because he spoke Georgian. He was, from a poorer nationality. He was not a Russian. He was a Georgian. And Stalin was a bad boy at the university. He was a very serious discipline problem. For example, they had a rule at the seminary that you could only read religious books. And so Stalin went to the local bookstore and he got a subscription. So they'd give him every book they had. And he started an underground book smuggling ring. And he got novels, Charles Dickens and Victor Hugo and all kinds of novels, selling novels that, the other boys in the university would read and pay him money for. He made a lot of money running this book smuggling ring. And he was always getting in trouble, and always getting in trouble. He was apparently quite a good student. He got good grades, but he was a discipline problem. And they frequently would put him into solitary confinement, kind of like in prison, right? Where they throw people in solitary confinement. That was how they punished boys in seminary school. It's kind of a religious punishment. Like you need to just be locked in this room and pray, basically. And so, he was so much of a discipline problem. Finally, his mother said, I'm not paying your bills anymore. He had to drop out of seminary school. And after he dropped out of seminary school, he got involved in labor struggles, but he actually became an award-winning poet. At the age of 17, he was probably the most famous poet in Georgia, right? Because he wrote poetry in the Georgian language. And his poetry was exceptional, and he was winning awards for his poetry, and people loved this poet. And he wrote these poems that people found to be very, very inspiring. Nowadays, poetry is kind of a dead art form, unfortunately. There are very few poetry books that are published. If you're in like near a university, there might be a poetry slam once a year or something. But back in the late 1800s, we're talking like the 1890s, poetry was a really big deal, right? And, all over the world, right? The written word, the poetic word was a big deal. And Stalin was an award-winning poet, and he actually wrote some pretty good poems. I don't know them in the original language, but you read the English translations. Some of them I even quote in my book. Stalin was a pretty good poet, a pretty good poet. And he got involved in labor activism, and he became a Marxist. And after he got involved in labor activism and Marxism, he started traveling throughout the Russian Empire, organizing labor unions. In a city called Batumi in Georgia. There were a group of oil workers who worked for the Rothschilds, the oil banking dynasty of Britain. And they went on strike, and some of their leaders were thrown in the jail. And there was a mob of people that went to the jail and pulled the walls down. And they got ropes and they pulled the walls of the jails down to free their comrades. And Stalin was the guy who led them. Stalin went to Azerbaijan, which is, now it's, now it's an independent country. It was part of the Russian Empire. And he organized Muslim workers and Christian workers to go on strike together. And they organized, and he preached against the devils who divide us and play Muslims against Christians. Stalin was a mass organizer, and he eventually became the editor of Pravda. Pravda means truth. And Pravda was the daily newspaper of the Bolshevik Party. And it didn't even say it was by the Bolsheviks. It was just the daily newspaper. And it was known for very, very short articles that were workers' correspondence, short articles of workers talking about their conditions. Most articles in the Pravda back then were only 2 to 3 paragraphs long. They would be anonymous, and it would be somebody saying, at my factory, the boss is doing this, and it makes me really mad. Or, it was workers' correspondence. And Stalin was the editor of this daily newspaper that was distributed all throughout the Russian Empire. That was largely short little articles, worker correspondence. So that was Stalin. Stalin was a mass organizer. His name literally means man of steel. And that was a nickname that he took on. I mean, his real name was Joseph Zhugashvili. And he was a newspaper editor. He was an award-winning poet. And more than anything else, Stalin was a man of action. He organized bank robberies, for example, to raise money for the Bolshevik Party. He organized, they did all kinds of crazy things. They would, Bolshevik women would sell themselves to rich men as mail order brides and then run away, and the Bolsheviks would take them away and they would keep the money to raise money. They did all kinds of crazy things. The book Young Stalin, if you ever want to read an exciting book, a lot of books about Stalin are pretty awful. Any book you find at Barnes & Noble is going to be awful. But there's a book called Young Stalin, which is about Stalin before the revolution, that is very, very good. And it just kind of gives you a picture of who he was as a person, right? All the image you have of Stalin as the mass murdering dictator, that all happened after the revolution. And so Simon Sebag Montefiore, who's kind of this conservative, writer from Britain, he wrote a biography called Young Stalin. And you get an image of a guy who was very much a hands-on organizer in Russia, a hands-on labor organizer, writer in Russia. That was Stalin, right? And yes, he was Country Joe, right? There's a rock and roll band from the 1960s called Country Joe and the Fish. And the reason they're called that is because the parents of the people who started the rock and roll band were communists, and Stalin was Country Joe. He was from Georgia, from a rural village, and the fish was Mao, because Mao Zedong said the masses are the water and the revolutionaries are the fish. So Stalin was Country Joe, Stalin and Mao are Country Joe and the fish. That's Stalin. Trotsky. Now, Trotsky was also born in the Russian Empire. He was born in Kherson, which is, was part of Ukraine in the Soviet Union. It's now a contested territory in the special military operation. It's part of the new republics that have joined with Russia. Trotsky was Jewish. He was from a kind of a middle-class family of Jewish folks. And he went to university. He went to a pretty good school in Odessa. Odessa is also, that's where, the Odessa massacre happened. That's part of the new republics in Russia. And he was in Odessa, and he went to school in Odessa. And at the university in Odessa, he joined the Narodniks. And then the Narodniks were a revolutionary movement that wanted to organize the peasantry. And then after a while, he became a Marxist, and then he joined the Marxists. And it was actually through a girlfriend, interestingly enough. He had a girlfriend, and the girlfriend recruited him to being a Marxist, which is interesting. And he was around the revolutionary intellectual circles, was first a Narodnik peasant revolutionary, then he became a Marxist. But the main thing is he traveled throughout Europe. Even though he was born in the Russian Empire, he didn't really fit in with the Russian Empire. He was Jewish. He faced a huge amount of discrimination. He really hated the Russian peasantry, considered them to be inherently backward. And there was a lot of anti-Semitism among the Russian peasantry. They had what they called pogroms, where they would go burn down Jewish villages. A lot of the more extreme elements in the Russian Orthodox Church said that Jews were evil because they rejected Christ. You know, and you know, there was what they called the Black Hundreds movement, which was kind of a fascist movement in Russia at the time that organized people to go burn Jewish villages and stuff like that. So, you know, you know, Trotsky didn't really like the Russian peasantry. He considered them to be very backwards. And he spent most of his life not in Russia. He spent his life in Vienna, in Britain, in London, in Paris, in like the big urban centers of Europe, where there was what you called the revolutionary intelligentsia. You had a lot of intellectuals, smart people who wrote books and talked about communism. And Trotsky was very well known among the revolutionary intelligentsia of Europe. He could speak many languages, including English. He spoke English, French, and he could give speeches, and he was just a well-known Russian exile, a revolutionary guy who had fled from Russia, was you know, part of the Russian Empire, born in the Russian Empire, but had fled, and he could give good lectures and wrote good books about Marxism, etc. In 1905, Russia had a very big uprising. You know, at the time, the 1905 rebellion in Russia. Trotsky went back to Russia in the rebellion, and he was the leader of the St. Petersburg Soviet, or Petrograd Soviet. They elected him as like the spokesperson for the council that they formed during the uprising. He was arrested and put on trial. He was put in prison. He eventually was able to like bribe his way out of prison and flee Russia again. And he spent his time going around Europe, going around these Marxist circles. And in Europe, he started to develop a concept called the permanent revolution. And that was Trotsky's theory that kind of defined his life, the theory of permanent revolution. And the theory of permanent revolution is not widely understood, but it's a very nuanced thing. So basically, there were many people at the time who said you could only have a socialist revolution in a Western industrialized country. And that was the majority position of the Marxist movement. The Mensheviks felt that way. Most Marxists felt that way, that if a country's not fully capitalist yet, if you still have feudalism, you can't really have a revolution. Well, Trotsky didn't agree with that. He said that even if a country still has feudalism, it could have a revolution. The Bolsheviks agreed with him about that, right? And that the Bolsheviks also thought that. However, Trotsky took it even further, though. He said that if a country, yes, in a country that was still feudal, the working class could take power. You could have a working class government, but the workers could not have an alliance with the peasantry because the peasants are inherently backward. And the only purpose that such a government has would be to spread communism to where it really matters, to the Western countries. That in a backward or semi-feudal country, you can have a revolution, but you can't include the peasants in the government because they're inherently backward. And on top of that, it should only exist as kind of a base area to spread communism to where it really matters in the West. Now, the Bolsheviks and Lenin didn't agree with that. You know, the Bolsheviks put forward the slogan for a revolutionary dictatorship of the workers and peasants. And they wanted to organize the peasantry to demand land redistribution, and they wanted to organize the workers to demand workers' rights. And so they called for peace, land, and bread, right? End World War I, have food for the hungry working class people, and redistribute the land to the peasantry. Trotsky opposed the demand for calling for land because he said land was private property and that the peasantry want to become capitalists. And so their demand for having land is their demand to become private property capitalist owners. So he didn't agree with that. On top of that, Trotsky put forward a theory called the United States of Europe. And he said that all the European countries should merge into one country because national divisions among the working class was a problem, and that France and Britain and Germany and Italy and Spain, all the Western European countries should merge into the European Union. He didn't call it the European Union. He called it the United States of Europe. Well, Lenin disagreed with that. And he said, no, if all the colonial powers merge into one country, then they'll be able to more effectively exploit and oppress the developing world, right? Then they'll be able to come together to exploit Africa, to exploit Asia, to exploit South America, etc. So Lenin said, we want there to be division among the imperialists. We want the French and the British not getting along. We want the Germans and the Americans to not get along. We want the imperialists to be divided so that the colonized people that are fighting for their national liberation can use that opening to assert themselves. Trotsky, on the other hand, said, no, we need to have solidarity of all the Western workers so they can come together and have a revolution where it really counts in the West. And they vehemently disagreed with each other. And if you read Lenin's essay, Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, he specifically calls out Trotsky over this nonsense about the United States of Europe, says it's an awful idea. Now, what it really got down to was Lenin developed a whole new theory called imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. He said we're not fighting against capitalism, we're fighting against monopolistic capitalism, the rule of big banks and big monopolies that are spreading their tentacles all over the world. And that socialism isn't going to come to the world through the struggle of the employer versus the employee, the worker versus the factory owner. It's going to be oppressed nations struggling for national liberation. Against imperialism, it's going to bring socialism into the world. Trotsky didn't accept that. Trotsky said, no, he was a classical Marxist. He wanted to hold on to the worker versus bosses thing. Lenin said the revolutionary energy was shifting to the East and to the colonized world. Trotsky still held out that it was the Western world where the future of mankind lay. And he actually lived in New York City. And he said New York City was the foundry where the fate of mankind will be forged. And he really did believe that the West, the Western capitalist countries, the imperialist homelands were the most advanced, and that the only way you could ever have socialism is if the Western countries had revolutions, that revolutions in the colonized world didn't really count. Whereas Lenin very much said that it's going to be the struggle of colonized people for national liberation that brings about the revolution. Now, because Trotsky believed that you could have a revolution in a country like Russia, even though it was semi-feudal, he was very much aligned with the Bolsheviks, right? The Mensheviks said we can only have a national democratic revolution. We can only have a capitalist revolution and then eventually maybe have a workers' revolution. But the Bolsheviks said we can have a full socialist revolution in Russia. Trotsky agreed with that. His theory of permanent revolution agreed with that. So he was considered to be an ally and a friend of the Bolshevik movement. However, in 1912, the Bolsheviks kicked out the people who didn't agree with them, and they formed their own party, the Bolshevik Party. They expelled the Mensheviks from the party, and they formed their own party. Trotsky didn't agree with them doing that. He said they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't form a whole new party based on their theory of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and all of that. And he formed what he called the August Bloc. And the August Bloc, people just called them the Trotskyites. That was his own group. It was called the August Bloc. And basically, Trotsky said, I want to be part of the Menshevik and I want to be part of the overall Marxist movement. I just want to be the radical wing of it, right? Whereas Lenin said, we're breaking with the Marxist movement. The Marxist movement is not anti-imperialist. The Marxist movement doesn't have a democratic centralist theory. They're not building a series. So we're going to form our own organization, our own revolutionary organization committed to our own interpretation. Trotsky said, I'm going to be part of the mainstream Marxist movement, but I'm going to be the radical faction within it. So his group was called the August Bloc, and they were part of the Menshevik Party, but they were considered the radical faction. And people called them like the interdiscines or whatever, and they were considered like the halfway position. You had the Mensheviks that were the mainstream Marxist social democratic party in Russia. Then you had the Bolsheviks, which is this new faction led by Lenin. That was a party of new type that had this whole theory of imperialism, etc. And the August Bloc was the faction that was seen as like the halfway, right? They were technically part of the Mensheviks, but they had very radical ideas. They were the radical faction of the Mensheviks. And Trotsky lived in New York City. He was the editor of a Russian language newspaper in New York City called Novy Mir. I don't speak Russian, so I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But it means new world or new peace. It's like a play on words, new world or new peace, Novy Mir. And he was the editor of that. And he was very well known in New York City in radical circles. He could give speeches in many different languages. And he was just well known as this Marxist guy who lived in New York City and had a newspaper and such. He developed kind of a reputation for refusing to tip in restaurants. That was one of his like trademarks, is that he would go to the restaurant, he would order his food, and then when they brought him the bill, he would give the waiter a speech about how you shouldn't have to get tips and, you know, you shouldn't rely on guys like me for tips. You should form a union. and he would refuse to tip the waiter and make a big show of refusing to tip the waiter. And like he was doing a good thing by not tipping the waiter. It's a really nasty. I just find that to be really offensive. I know people who've worked as waiters before, and they know the Jehovah's Witnesses do that infamously. They will, instead of tipping, they will leave their tract and say, well, God's word is the most valuable thing ever, or whatever. It's a really kind of an anti-working class thing to do, but it comes from kind of an arrogance. And Trotsky was known to be very boastful and rude and self-important. And yeah, he was at one point, there was a story of like a waiter threw soup on him, because he was so disgusted by him being such an asshole. And the Trotsky was just, I don't know, he was just well known in New York City as this Russian speaking guy, this guy from Russia who spoke many languages, had a newspaper, and was known in radical circles. Anyhow, long story short, the Russian Revolution happened in 1917. In February of 1917, the Tsar stepped down. The provisional government came to power. Russia was in a revolutionary mode. And Trotsky said, all right, this is my time. And he went back to Russia. And his group, the August Bloc, merged into the Bolshevik Party. And Trotsky became a member of the National Committee, or the Politburo of the Bolshevik Party. He was one of their national leaders. Because he brought, hundreds of people. He had a following of like hundreds and hundreds of people who followed his teachings, and they merged into the Bolshevik Party in August of 1917, like right before the revolution. After the Russian Revolution, he was the first foreign minister of the Soviet Union, and his job was to sign the treaty to end Russia's involvement in World War I. And he didn't do it. The Bolsheviks had come to power on a platform of, we're going to end World War I. They were the anti-war party, right? The Russian people didn't want to fight in World War I. Germany was a country that borders Russia, that does a lot of business with Russia. There were many Russian business owners and others who didn't want to fight. And the Bolsheviks had been able to take power on the basis of, we will end the war. And so they took power, and then it was their job to go end the war. And Trotsky didn't want to do it. And he wasn't the only one. There were a number of Bolshevik leaders who said, well, now that we have a revolutionary government, we'll keep fighting in World War I, but it's a different kind of war now because we're a socialist revolutionary government. And Lenin said, no, we have to end the war. So they sent Trotsky to meet with the Germans to end the war, and he didn't do it. And weeks and weeks went by, and there was no peace treaty. And finally, he went back to Russia with no peace treaty. And he announced he had this brilliant idea. They were going to have no war, but no peace, meaning that they would stop fighting the Germans, but they would not sign a peace treaty with them because they would never recognize the imperialist German empire or whatever. And Lenin said, that's absolutely ridiculous. And I will resign from the government if you don't sign the treaty. So Trotsky was forced out of being foreign minister, and they finally did sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. But Russia lost huge amounts of territory because of that. And thousands of people died on the battlefield this whole time. There were deaths around the clock. People are fighting with the Germans over this. So, I mean, again, it's a very, very, it's a pretty awful thing. So Trotsky stepped down as the foreign minister, but they made him the spokesperson for the Red Army, which was actually something he was very, very good at. Trotsky was an amazing speaker. And so they gave him a costume, which included a hat with a visor on it and a big long coat and leather pants, which was apparently very common back then. Cavalry in the military would wear leather pants. So he wore these leather pants and this big suit with a visor and this fancy outfit. And they put him on a train that went from military base to military base. And he would put on this very elaborate propaganda show at the military bases. And it was apparently very good. He was quite good at what he did. And, one thing that they would do is they would line up all the soldiers who had been caught trying to run away or deserting. And they would line them up before a firing squad like they were going to give them the death penalty. And just in the nick of time, Trotsky's train would arrive and he would stop the execution and he would save their lives. And it was staged. It was fake. But it was like a thing he would do. He would save their lives. And then he would preach his revolutionary message about why you should fight for the revolution to those soldiers who'd want to run away, to convince them they should not want to run away. And it would be a very exciting speech and people would cry and it was very exciting. And he was up there with his visor and his leather pants and his outfit and waving his arms and all of this. And then at the end of his speech, he would pull a gold watch out of his coat and he would find a random soldier in the crowd and give them the gold watch. And it was like, the prize at the end of the show. And everyone was like, wow, a poor poor soldier got his own gold watch. It was a pretty good show that Trotsky put on, and when he went from military to base, he had his own train car that they had for him. And they took him from military base to military base doing this kind of, propaganda show. And it was apparently quite good. And that's actually what he's remembered for, were these, these kind of propaganda shows. I think I must admit, to some degree, those propaganda shows probably had an influence on Adolf Hitler. If you look at the Nuremberg rallies that Hitler did, they were probably inspired by it. The military uniform and the working the crowd and all of that, so he may have had an influence. We know that the Nazis studied Bolshevik propaganda. Joseph Goebbels, his favorite movie was the movie Battleship Potemkin, which was like the first movie the Bolsheviks made that they sent all over the world, which was a very exciting film. So, whatever. Trotsky was very good at propaganda, very good speaker and orator. He could put on a good show. What he did during the Russian Civil War was actually pretty good. He was a pretty good front man for the Red Army. It was a very, very effective thing that he did. And the Russian Civil War was a really, really awful war in which millions of people died. I mean, they not on the battlefield, but hundreds of thousands of people died on the battlefield. But on top of that, many more people died because there was a blockade and they couldn't get medicine and all of that. And Trotsky was the guy who was the main propagandist for the Bolsheviks during the Russian Civil War. All right. So after the Russian Revolution, they formed the Communist International, which was an organization of political parties around the world that took leadership from the Bolsheviks, took leadership from the Soviet Union, were aligned with the Soviet Union, wanted to have a revolution like the Soviet Union. The Communist International, or the Comintern, was formed, right? And Lenin had 21 points for admission. If you agreed with these 21 points, your party could join the Communist International. And there were many parties that didn't join the Communist International, were rejected. One example, in South Africa, the Communist Party of South Africa was formed, and in its original statement of principles, it said white supremacy, whites only. We believe in white, it was a white people only party. Well, the Bolsheviks looked at that and said, no, not allowed. And they were rejected, and they had to form a whole new communist party that didn't believe in white supremacy. That then was able to join the Communist International. Very wild stuff. Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who was the leader of the Chinese Revolution, he wanted to join the Communist International. But Lenin said, you're not a communist. You don't believe in communism. You don't believe in Marxism, Leninism. You're a Roman Catholic. You believe in socialism, but it's not our kind of socialism. So Dr. Sun Yat-sen was an observer. He was not allowed to be a member of the Communist International, but he attended their early gatherings as an observer and a guest. And he was a personal friend of Lenin. But you had to be a communist. You had to believe in the Bolshevik ideology, Marxism, Leninism, to be a member of the Communist International. Well, the Communist International was formed. And the first thing that they did in the Communist International was they had a fight against what they called ultra-leftism. And Lenin actually wrote a book called Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, because many of the people that joined the newly formed communist parties only joined them because the Bolsheviks had had a violent revolution. They weren't interested in anything else in violent revolution. And they were interested in violent revolution. And Lenin had to basically, you read Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. He lays out the history of the Bolshevik Party. He explains tactics that are used. And he urges them to basically not engage in activities that isolate them from the working class. For example, he urges them to run candidates in elections. He says, look, elections are the only time when a lot of working class people think about politics. So if we don't run candidates for office, we're not going to reach those working people. So we should run candidates for office and use the elections as a platform to spread our message. Well, you had a lot of people around the world were joining communist parties. They said, oh, no, we don't want to run elections. We want to revolt. We want to have a revolution. We don't want to vote. Well, that was not the correct position. Lenin said also, if you can join a non-communist labor union, you should join it and join it and win the workers in that non-communist labor union to revolutionary politics. Lenin said, in some cases, you may want to endorse a non-communist candidate who is like the center of resistance. And at the time in Britain, right, they were having Russiagate of the 1920s, right? The Labor Party of Britain was a very new political party. And they had this thing called the Zinoviev letter. And it was fake. It was a fake letter. And they claimed that the Labor Party of Britain was being funded by the Soviet Union. And they were using that to try and outlaw the Labor Party because they said, oh, the Labor Party is funded by the Bolsheviks. It's the Russian conspiracy. Well, that was fake. It was bullshit. And a lot of the people in the British Communist Party hated the Labour Party, rightly so, because it was a fake party. But at the time, Lloyd George, who was the prime minister, was a conservative, was trying to outlaw the Labour Party and was accusing the Labour Party of being like the Bolsheviks. And so Lenin said, let's endorse the Labour Party in elections. And when the workers are rallying around the Labour Party to defend it from Lloyd George and from these lies that they're funded by Russia, we can be on their side and recruit them. And and that can win us allies. And he said, we'll support the Labour Party, but we'll be supporting the Labour Party to destroy the Labour Party. He says, we'll support the Labour Party in the same way that a rope supports a hanged man, meaning that they're not endorsing the Labour Party because they agree with it. They're being strategic, and they understand that even though the Labour Party sucks, at the time, it was accused of being a pro-Soviet party. It was being accused of being a revolutionary party. A lot of working class people felt it was under attack. And so strategically, it was necessary to endorse the Labour Party. And this is the fight against ultra-leftism. And that basically Lenin was basically telling the newly formed communist parties, don't isolate yourself. Don't isolate yourself from the masses of people. Go where the masses are and win them to our revolutionary ideology. Participate in elections, join labor unions, do what you can to win the workers there to socialism. And that was the fight against ultra-leftism. Out of the fight against ultra-leftism, you got the concept of the United Front. And the concept of the United Front was that basically communists should advocate things that not only they think, but other people think too. Things like freeing Eugene Debs. Eugene Debs was a socialist leader in America who was sent to prison for opposing World War I. And there was a widespread campaign to free Eugene Debs. And you didn't have to be a communist to want to free Eugene Debs. You could be a pacifist. You could be an advocate of free speech. You could be a socialist. But if communists organized big demonstrations and protests and letter writing campaigns to free Eugene Debs, they were part of a united front. The call for an 8-hour workday. Again, you didn't have to be a communist to believe in the 8-hour workday, but if communists built organizations to fight for an 8-hour workday, that was a way of connecting with other people. And that the united front was the concept that Lenin urged the newly formed communist parties to adopt. The idea that, that we're fighting for things that benefit the entire working class, and we're putting ourselves at the center of working class struggles, and we're trying to get the working class to be independent of the capitalists, right? To be fighting in its own economic interests, the United Front. On top of that, in the colonized world, they had the idea of forming a united front against imperialism. And this is very important. The idea was that in places like Africa and Asia and Latin America, these countries are oppressed by imperialism. And so the job of the communists is not to incite the workers against their employers. It's to unite everybody in the country who wants to fight imperialism. And that the revolution in the colonized world might have two stages. It might be it might first be a national democratic revolution against the imperialists that then leads to a socialist revolution. Right? And that communists should position themselves at the center of what they call the national democratic revolution against the imperialists. Now, that's a really, really important thing to understand. And that has a really, really big impact on the Chinese Revolution. As I just talked about, the May 4th movement. Happy May 4th, everybody. In China at the time, in 1911, the KMT nationalist movement, led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, had established the Republic of China, which was a government that had, they'd overthrown the emperor. They had the Republic of China, but a big chunk of China was not run by the KMT Republic of China and Dr. Sun Yat-sen. A lot of China was controlled by local warlords who didn't recognize the central government. After World War I, you had the May 4th uprising that was against the imperialists, against the Japanese, against the Americans and the British who had screwed China over after World War I. And you had a widespread anti-imperialist movement in China. And at the time, the Communist Party was formed, and almost immediately the Communist Party joined the KMT Nationalist Party of China. That was the party that had been the leader of the 1911 revolution that led the Chinese Republic. And the Communist Party said that we're fighting for an anti-imperialist revolution, and the National Democratic Revolution of China is being led by the KMT Nationalist Party, so we're going to join it. The KMT Nationalist movement had been led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, They had three principles that they believed in: independence of China, democracy, like an elected government, and the people's livelihood. And the last point about the people's livelihood was vaguely understood to mean some kind of socialism, but it wasn't clear. And Dr. Sun Yat-sen was the leader of the National Democratic Revolution in China, the leader of the KMT, and the Communist Party of China merged into the KMT as a communist faction. And they said, we're the true inheritors of what Dr. Sun Yat-sen believes. If you really want independence, you really want democracy, you really want to increase the people's livelihood, you should have a socialist revolution, because socialism and communism is the road to achieving national liberation. They were part of the National Democratic Revolution. China and Russia border each other. They're very close to each other. And, Dr. Sun Yat-sen is this great anti-imperialist who's building this great anti-imperialist movement. And the Soviet Union is anti-imperialist. So the Soviet Union started giving military support to the government of China, to the KMT. They built a military academy, the Wenpao Military Academy. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I don't speak Chinese. But they built a military training school in the Soviet Union. And they sent Mikhail Borodin to China. And he was an important leader of the Bolsheviks. And he was sent to China as the military advisor to Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And the Soviet Union gave them guns and gave them weapons. It set up this whole military academy. And Mikhail Borodin, this high-ranking Bolshevik leader, was in China helping them. Trotsky didn't agree with this. Trotsky said that the KMT party of China and the nationalist movement in China was not communist, and that only the working class is revolutionary, and that this was all a big mistake. This should not be done. They said that this was betraying the Chinese working class by funding and supporting this bourgeois nationalist movement. 1925, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of the nationalist movement, he died. And shortly after that, the Northern Expedition happened, which was a huge military campaign for the KMT government to try and retake parts of China from the warlords. Mikhail Borodin was involved in it. So after the death of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the new leader of the KMT nationalist movement in China was Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek came in, and we don't know why, but Chiang Kai-shek, he'd received military training. He'd actually gone to Russia to get military training. He had many people. He was really good friends with a lot of communists. But for some reason, Chiang Kai-shek turned against the communists. And in 1927, Chiang Kai-shek launched the White Terror campaign, and he executed over 100,000 communists. And he basically tried to purge the KMT Nationalist Party of Communists. And Dr. That Chiang Kai-shek was working with the British, and he was kind of selling out the nationalist KMT movement, and he pivoted in this very anti-communist direction. We don't really know why. Some people say that he was misled, that the British told him that the communists were trying to kill him. Some people say the communists were actually planning a coup attempt against him, or that there was a factional fight. For whatever reason, Dr. Chiang Kai-shek turned against the communists, and he started executing communists. And in Shanghai, the communists seized control of the city to avoid being executed. There was a battle, the Shanghai Commune, the Canton Commune of 1927. There was uprisings, they were defeated, and the communists of China had to flee to the countryside. It was a big defeat for the Chinese Revolution. 1927, the White Terror. Chiang Kai-shek, had been in an alliance with the communists, and he turned against the communists very viciously, killed a lot of communists. So Trotsky said that Stalin had sold out the Chinese Revolution by supporting the KMT. Trotsky said this was all Stalin's fault, that if the communists had not been supporting the KMT and not been giving military training to the KMT, but instead forming their own army and forming an independent working class movement, this never would have happened. Now that's absurd, right? In China, a country that was overwhelmingly agrarian at the time, overwhelmingly peasants, the idea of forming an independent working class political movement was pretty absurd. And the KMT movement had a very anti-imperialist character. Sun Yat-sen was a friend of Lenin, and that it was the right thing to do for the Chinese communists to be part of the KMT movement. That accusation from Trotsky is crazy. But that's what Trotsky said, that Stalin sold out the Chinese Revolution, sold the Chinese Revolution down the river, and he denounced the idea of having a two-stage revolution, a national democratic revolution, and then a socialist revolution. He said you have to have one revolution, permanent revolution, where it just goes all the way to socialism. And only the working class can take power. He said the peasants are an inherently backward class. Trotsky, in the name of permanent revolution, blamed Stalin for the 1927 White Terror and the big setbacks for the communists in China in 1927. And that's really important. If it wasn't for that, China was kind of the main point of disagreement that Trotsky had with the Communist International. Originally, and this is important, we're going to talk about the Bolshevik Party. So the Bolsheviks were the ruling party. The Bolsheviks were the party created by Lenin that led the Russian Revolution. Originally, they were not the only party in the Soviet Union. Originally, there were three political parties in the Soviet Union. When the Bolsheviks took power and established a Soviet government, there were three political parties that recognized it. There was the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin. Then there was a party called the Left Menshevik Party. People that had been in the Menshevik Party that supported it, they were called the Left Mensheviks. And then there was another party called the Left Socialist Revolutionary Party. And originally it was those three political parties that recognized the Soviet Constitution. But it was very clear that the Bolsheviks had led the revolution. The Bolsheviks were the majority. They were the ruling party. So everybody who was serious about actually wanting to build a new country, the Soviet Union, joined the Bolshevik Party. Gradually, people started leaving the Left Menshevik Party, leaving the Left Socialist Revolutionary Party, and joining the Bolsheviks. However, the two political parties, they remained. The Left Mensheviks and the Left Socialist Revolutionary Party remained, and they were involved in attempted coups. And there was times that, there were attempted coups, so they were outlawed. They outlawed the two parties because they were involved in conspiracies to seize power. And so the Bolsheviks became the only party. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Bolshevik, they became the only political party that was legal. But that's not how it started. And then after the Bolsheviks were the only party, there was a faction within the Bolsheviks called the Workers' Opposition. And the Workers' Opposition said that they shouldn't have a strong central government. They said that these local councils that had been built as part of the revolution, these Soviets, that's Soviet means council, it's like workers' councils, they should be autonomous in local regions. And their slogan was Soviets without communists, meaning we'll have local autonomous groups, but we won't have a central communist party telling everyone what to do. Soviets without communists. That was in the name of pure workers' democracy. We want Soviets without communists. They lost because they're fighting the Civil War at the time, and they've got different factions and such, and that just wasn't going to work. They lost. So then in Kronstadt, there was a group of sailors that were part of the Workers' Opposition that took up arms against the Bolsheviks, and it was a very bloody fight, the Battle of Kronstadt, where a lot of sailors that were members of the Workers' Opposition fought with the Red Army, and it was actually Trotsky who was the leader of putting down the Kronstadt uprising, and a lot of people died. I don't know what the death count was. Let me look it up. Kronstadt uprising. The Kronstadt rebellion in 1921. The death count was there were about 2,000. About 2,000 people. Whew, it was pretty ugly. About 2,168 people died in the first assault, and 1,412 in the second. So it was a pretty bloody thing. These anarchists, basically, the anarchist faction of the Bolshevik Party, seized control of Kronstadt, a lot of sailors, and there was a really ugly fight in which thousands of people were killed. And it was pretty ugly. And the Workers' Opposition, the Kronstadt sailors were defeated. And Trotsky was the guy who killed them all, right? He was the guy who led the army in to crush them. So after the Kronstadt uprising in 1921, the Bolshevik Party banned factions. They said, we don't want to have any more factions because factions lead to disagreements, and we can't afford to have any disagreements. We have to have ironclad discipline. They banned factions in 1921. And Trotsky claimed that was only a temporary measure. But there's no evidence of that. It looks like that was a permanent policy. We're not going to have factions within our party. Our party marches as one. Factions were outlawed. And again, you have to keep in mind the Russian Civil War was happening. Right? This is an ugly war. 15 countries invaded them. They're trying to have ironclad military discipline in the face of an onslaught by their enemy. So after the Russian Civil War, they have to figure out what they're going to do next. Now, during the Russian Civil War, the military, the Red Army, controlled everything. They called it war communism or military communism, where basically the military controlled everything. It rationed the food. Land was nationalized. And the military controlled everything. It was military communism. But after the Russian Civil War, they had to decide what to do next. And there was a big debate about what to do next. And Lenin put forward what he called the new economic policy, which was that peasants all got their own tract of land. They got private property. They had nationalized all the land during the war communism period, but then they gave every peasant their own land, and they encouraged private enterprise. They encouraged small shopkeepers to open up their businesses. They encouraged farmers to expand and sell their land if they wanted to make money or buy new land. They had private capitalism in a lot of the countryside, and they had private factories that were set up, and it was the new economic policy. And it was basically they had capitalism, but it was controlled, and the government controlled the banks, the banking system, and controlled the lending of money, and the government controlled the electrification. And that's where Lenin's famous quote is. He said, look, we're too poor to have full communism at this point. What we need is to develop. And in order to develop, we need to have free enterprise, but we'll have the commanding heights, the center of the economy, under public control. And that communism means Soviet power plus electrification. And we'll use the free market to build up the power plants so we can electrify the country. We'll use the free market to make the countryside more prosperous and grow our own food. We're going to use capitalism, but it's going to be a controlled capitalism in our national interest. And it was called the new economic policy. Trotsky opposed it. Trotsky wanted to continue war communism indefinitely, but he was defeated, right? And Lenin's new economic policy won out, and that was the policy. Lenin gave a very powerful speech against Trotsky, where he said that Trotsky thinks that military methods will work with the overall population. Trotsky was saying that, look, we'll just draft everyone into the military, and their military service will be working in a factory. And Lenin says you cannot do that because, that might work in the military, but among the population, you can't do that. And you need to persuade people. You can't just force people to do things. But Trotsky didn't really care about the Russian peasantry. He hated the Russian peasantry. He wasn't even really concerned about Russia. He just wanted to build a giant military machine to carry out the permanent revolution, to march communism into Europe. He didn't really care. Whereas Lenin was saying, if we want to stay in power, we need to win people over. We need to have the new economic policy. Things were bad economically. People were starving to death. They needed to get the economy better. And we can't afford to just have, just nationalize everything and have a military economy. We need to allow the free market. We need to redistribute land to the peasants and let them start having the market and selling their goods. So Lenin died in 1924. And after Lenin died, there was debate about what to do next. And the first faction that formed was led by Bukharin. And Bukharin, he was what was called the right opposition. And he wanted to continue the new economic policy indefinitely. And he wanted to sign treaties with Western countries. And the idea was that, we're very poor and we need foreign investment. So we're going to sign treaties with Western countries. And we're going to continue having free market policies in the countryside. And Stalin aligned with Bukharin originally. Trotsky formed the left opposition. And the left opposition was based on his theory of permanent revolution, which is he wanted to have the Soviet Union just be a temporary holdout in the struggle to spread communism to the West. And that was his position. Trotsky lost out and was defeated by Bukharin and Stalin. Then, after Trotsky was basically forced out of the party, and he eventually fled the country, he moved to Turkey. Stalin solidified power in 1928 and then defeated Bukharin. And Stalinization, they call it, the Sixth World Congress of the Communist International in 1928 was a very, very big turning point in the history of the world. 1928 was when Stalin defeated Bukharin. He had already defeated Trotsky. And that's when the Soviet Union, that's the year of Stalinization of the Soviet Union, which I think was a very good thing, actually. And I think, it was actually, it's funny because, people that defend Stalin generally say, well, Stalin was just continuing what Lenin did. And Trotskyites generally point to, oh, yes, the Soviet Union became thoroughly Stalinized and that was bad. I think, yes, 1928 was a very big turning point in the history of the world and of the Soviet Union, but it was good. The Stalinization of the Soviet Union, after Stalin defeated Bukharin, he'd already defeated Trotsky, they changed Soviet economic policy to socialism in one country, and they launched 5-year economic plans, meaning that Stalin said, look, the Western capitalist economies are going to crash. He saw that there was an economic crisis on the horizon. He said, we have to industrialize as rapidly as possible. So instead of having private free enterprise, we're going to rapidly industrialize the country. And Stalin mobilized the population to build. And they had the 5-year plans. And it was an economic miracle. And you can read any publication at the time. Here's a clip that I always show on these streams. This is from a PBS documentary. No country had ever rapidly industrialized this way. They did the first 5-year plan and they completed it in 4 years. The slogan was 5 in 4, right? And they completed the first 5-year plan. No one had ever seen anything like it. The Soviet Union went from being a very, very impoverished country to having the world's largest power plants, the world's largest steel industry, the world's largest oil industry, wiping out illiteracy, modern universities. No country had ever done what the Soviet Union did during the 5-year plans of the 1930s.
To produce engineers and technicians for the new society, training was expanded. And the communists said women should have equality with men, with equal pay. Ella Shishtir was one of a new generation of women.
Когда Ленин сказал, стране нужна электрификация, а коммунизм это советская...
When Lenin said that communism is Soviet power plus electrification, I decided that I should become an electrical engineer, that was my holy duty. And I didn't want to just draw up plans, I wanted to build an electric power station. That was my mission, and I achieved it. The revolution gave me the right to feel equal to any man. It gave me the right to work, to study what I wanted to study.
Она давала мне право трудиться, учиться так, как я хочу.
Yodorova was held up as an example to others.
We live so well. Our hearts are so joyful. In no other country are there such happy young people as us. We're the happiest young people. And on behalf of all young people, I want to thank our party and our dear comrade Stalin for this joy that we have. Stalin set a task. Build this or build that. And thanks to the fact that people trusted him and this enthusiasm of young people, it was possible. Remember, this was a country where people were illiterate, lived in virtual darkness, wore birch bark shoes. Even now, I think it's like something out of a fairy tale. How was it possible at one of the most difficult times to raise these great construction sites? It was only possible through the unity of the people and the love of the people for their idol. Because for us, Stalin was an idol.
Teams of young activists were sent to the country.
We went from house to house in search of illiterate people. We made a note of their names. We then found suitable rooms to hold classes in.
Learning to write would open new doors for those trapped at the bottom of society. One woman who couldn't attend classes because of her child at home was helped by Anastasia Denisova.
Я сказала, что вот тебе учебник, вот будешь заниматься.
I said, here's a textbook for you. I'll come to you so you can learn to read at home. I remember vividly that when the baby cried, she carried on writing with one hand while she rocked him with the other. She was so keen to study. I'll always remember her striving for knowledge and enlightenment. It was immense.
Просто-напросто была огромная.
For Valentina Mikova and Mikhail Arkhipov, these were the most fulfilling days of their lives.
На строительстве домен был один эскаватор. И то плохой.
There was one excavator at the blast furnace building site, and it wasn't always reliable. So we dug all the foundations by hand.
Понимаете, копошатся люди.
The trench would be teeming with people. One takes the earth, throws it to the level above. The second person throws it to the third to the fourth, up to 5 or 6 levels. That was how we got the earth out of the trench. Then it was taken away in wheelbarrows.
Yeah, what Stalin did with the 5-year plans, the world had never seen anything like it. And that was Stalin. After he defeated the Bukharinite opposition, he'd already defeated the Trotskyites. He launched the 5-year plans. And what made the 5-year plans work is that they gave awards to people who worked really hard. Stakhanovism, it was called. And if you worked harder than everybody else, if you dug the most coal or you worked the most extra hours, they gave you an award. And what Stalin generally did was he went from factory to factory giving out awards. He was the celebrity, the superstar. It was on the radio every day, was in the newspaper every day. His picture was everywhere. And when he visited your factory, and if you had, worked the hardest, he came to your factory and he put a medal on you and he gave you an award. And that was like the height of your life. And if you worked really hard, you got a cash bonus. It was called Stakhanovism. And that's what made the 5-year plans work. And everyone was kind of competing to work really, really hard to get honored by Stalin. This is what they call really existing socialism or Stalinism, or this was the Cold War Soviet economic model of you have 5-year economic plans. You have a very charismatic leader who's like the symbol of the nation. People who work really, really hard get awards. The leader goes from factory to factory and farm to farm, giving people awards all the time. You have collective farms in the countryside, which are farms that are cooperative but sell their produce to the state at a fixed rate. You have nationalized factories and industries, and you just mobilize the whole country to build. The whole country is kind of like one gigantic corporation. That's basically what it is. The country is a gigantic corporation with a really superstar, famous CEO at the center who goes around giving people bonuses and awards all the time for working really, really hard. And the focus is on produce. We're going to increase our electrification. We're going to build more tractors. We're going to pave our roads. We're going to wipe out illiteracy. We're going to grow more crops. We're going to build. And this model called really existing socialism is very, very successful at getting countries industrialized. Countries in the developing world that are very poor because of imperialism, that didn't have paved roads, that didn't have full electrification, that that had widespread illiteracy. This model of having a revolution and then the government nationalizes the industries and mobilizes the population to build was very, very effective. And to say that it didn't work, I don't know where people get this. I mean, the Soviet Union became a superpower in a few short years, strong enough to defeat the Nazi invaders and invent space travel. This model works. Now, the problems come later, right? And we'll talk about that some other time. But in terms of raising countries up to basic level of industrialization, taking third world countries and industrializing them, what Stalin pioneered, this model of socialism in one country, is very, very effective. Now, when the Communist International was solidified under Stalin's leadership, they had the 6th World Congress of the Communist International. And the slogan was class against class. And they said that the focus should be on opposing the social democrats. They said the Western capitalist economies are going to collapse. He saw the Great Depression on the horizon, and he said the focus needs to be on opposing the social democrats that are the roadblock to the revolution, right? And they called them social fascists. And this was the third period political line. Now, during this period, this is when the communists surged in popularity and strength. They organized unemployment demonstrations. They built labor unions that were communist controlled. And communism really advanced because the Soviet Union was really rapidly industrializing and because the Western economy was collapsing during the Great Depression. And this was the period when communism really surged ahead as a political movement. Trotsky blamed this policy of opposing the Social Democrats for Hitler coming to power in Germany. Trotsky said it was because of the fact that Stalin was so focused on opposing the Social Democrats that the Social Democrats and the communists didn't team up to stop Hitler, and it was Stalin's fault that Hitler took power. That's not true. In Germany at the time, the Social Democrats were the ruling party. They had been in power, and they had murdered Rosa Luxemburg, and they many times had killed communist activists, and they were the party of industrial labor unions, workers that worked in factories that were still employed during the Great Depression when unemployment was widespread in Germany, massive unemployment. And as a result, the Social Democrats became more and more conservative and more anti-communist, and they were blood enemies with the communists and killed communists in many instances. Meanwhile, the communists increasingly in Germany became the party of the unemployed, of the desperately poor unemployed. The communists would organize bread riots and lead mobs of hungry people to break into stores and take food. And they organized their own militia, the Red Front Fighters League, it was called. And the Social Democrats of Germany and the communists of Germany were blood enemies. They would never be working together because they represented two different social strata. And many times the communists offered a united front with the Social Democrats. Social Democrats said no. Many times the Social Democrats offered a united front with the communists, and the communists said no. It wasn't going to happen. It wasn't because Stalin was just so evil and he caused Hitler to come to power. That's not the case, right? That the two parties probably wanted to work together, but they had killed each other. They were blood enemies, and they represented two very different social strata. Well, employed industrial workers and completely unemployed, destitute, poor people. They weren't going to form one thing, but that's what Trotsky claimed. Trotsky's followers, after Trotsky fled the Soviet Union, for a while he lived in Turkey, then he lived in France, eventually he moved to Mexico, and he formed the Fourth International, right? The Communist International was the Third International. The Trotskyites, they formed the Fourth International. And then the Trotskyites joined these social democratic parties. They had what was called the French Turn in 1934 to 1936. And it was during this period that the communists really gained a huge amount of support because of the collapse of the Western economy. In America, they organized hunger marches, and they organized the veterans, the bonus army. Thousands of veterans went to Washington, D.C. and occupied the National Mall, demanding the payment of veterans' benefits. And they because they were kicked out of the American Federation of Labor, they couldn't join the regular labor unions. They formed their own labor unions, and they organized sharecroppers in the South, poor sharecroppers and textile workers. And the communists, they built their own labor unions. They built the unemployed demonstrations. This was the period where they had a lot of influence. And in Britain, it was the same way. When miners in Britain were losing their jobs, they had big marches of miners from Scotland, mines in Scotland, all the way down to London, demanding payments, and thousands of workers in the communist labor unions marched down to Britain and the unemployment councils. And communism was really surging in popularity. And their main enemy during this period was the Social Democrats, who said, oh, sure, we believe in socialism, but that Stalin is a mass murderer, and that Stalin's a dictator, and that Stalin's evil. And there's another layer to this, which was the other thing that happened is part of socialism in one country was Stalin did sign treaties with the Western countries. Trotsky didn't want to do that. He wanted to spread communism to the Western countries. Stalin signed treaties, and the Soviet Union eventually got recognition from America. and Britain and France. They all diplomatically recognized the Soviet Union. And part of the 5-year plans was that they started hiring American industrialists to start working in the Soviet Union. And Henry Ford was hired to help build auto plants in the Soviet Union. General Electric was hired to help the Soviet Union build power plants. The Koch brothers, Fred Koch, who was their dad, was a chemist in America. Stalin hired him to build the Soviet oil industry. And the Social Democrats wanted a boycott of the Soviet Union. They wanted a complete embargo. Whereas the industrialists, right, these like kind of tycoon capitalists, like General Electric was owned by the Morgans. The Morgans, they weren't going to boycott the Soviet Union. If they could make money going to the Soviet Union, building a power plant, sure. Henry Ford was kind of was this legendary businessman, whatever, and if the Soviet Union was going to pay him to set up a factory, he would do it, right? And that it was the Social Democrats and the bankers in particular, the British, the Rothschilds, and the ultra rich that wanted a complete blockade and boycott of the Soviet Union. And it was the industrialists who didn't, right? And the captains of industry, they were called. And Stalin even hinted at this time that captains of industry or industrialists might be better than bankers. And he argued that the bankers didn't want economic growth. They just wanted to maintain their financial monopoly. But captains of industry, I've heard it even claimed that Stalin invented the term captains of industry. I can't confirm that. But captains of industry like Henry Ford, like Fred Koch, like the Morgans, that they were more progressive because they believed in economic growth. Now, that was the policy. And so because of that, a lot of these kind of Elon Musk type guys that were like freewheeling, Howard Rourke, free market, industrial tycoons, they would do business with Stalin. Whereas the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers wanted a complete boycott of the Soviet Union. So the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, the Fabian Society in Britain, they were the ones sponsoring the Social Democrats. That's very important. The Social Democrats were being sponsored by the liberal faction of the bourgeoisie, whereas the industrialists, they were the ones that were willing to do business with the Soviet Union. And so that was the basis of this divide. The Social Democrats were teamed up with the bankers. They wanted a total boycott of the Soviet Union, whereas the industrialists didn't care and they were willing to do a business with the Soviet Union. And so the reason that the communists focused on opposing the Social Democrats and they didn't really focus on opposing the industrialists and the fascist, you could say the fascist movement that was kind of associated with industrialists, was because of this, right? And that, Henry Ford was somewhat fascist sympathetic, and some of these other capitalists were fascist sympathetic, but they were willing to do business with the Soviet Union. And that's an important aspect of this as well. But it changed, right? And it changed. And you had the 7th World Congress in 1935. What changed? Well, in 1933, Hitler took power in Germany. And Hitler became the dictator of Germany. And Germany became a fascist dictatorship. All the communists were thrown in prison. And fascist movements were spreading throughout Europe. And that was a realignment that changed everything. And in 1935, they had the 7th World Congress, which was the last World Congress of the Communist International. And at the 7th World Congress, the Communist International completely flipped its tactics. And the main speaker was Georgy Dimitrov, who was a Bulgarian guy. And Georgy Dimitrov was a Bulgarian communist who'd been living in Germany. And Hitler took power, you'll remember, and Hitler was the chancellor, and then the Reichstag, the parliament building in Germany, was lit on fire, and they blamed the Communist Party for that. They put all the communists in jail, and then Hitler had a super majority because all the seats in the parliament that were owned by communists were then replaced by Nazis, so he had a super majority. That's how Hitler became the dictator. Well, Georgy Dimitrov was a Bulgarian communist activist who was living in Germany, and Hitler arrested him and framed him for burning the Reichstag and said that he had burned the Reichstag. And Georgy Dimitrov was at the center of like a show trial in Nazi Germany where they tried to blame him for burning the Reichstag, burning the parliament, and say it was a communist conspiracy. And Georgy Dimitrov did a really good job defending himself. And on national radio broadcasts, he proved he was innocent. And it was a kangaroo court. He was supposed to have no chance in hell to win, but he was just such a good speaker. And the Nazis were so sloppy in how they framed him. he proved he was innocent and he was acquitted. They had to acquit him because it was so obvious on the radio broadcast that he didn't do it. Georgy Dimitrov was found not guilty, and he went back to the Soviet Union as a hero because he had, fought in his own court. He had defended himself, and he was like an international celebrity. Georgy Dimitrov was this communist that Hitler had tried to frame for burning the parliament, and he didn't do it. So in 1935, they gathered all the communists of the world for the 7th World Congress of the Communist International, and Georgy Dimitrov, the Bulgarian communist, anti-fascist hero, he gave the main speech, and they called for what they called a people's front against fascism. And before, they had said that the Social Democrats were the main enemy. But now they argued that Hitler in Germany, and you had a big fascist movement in France. There were multiple attempted fascist coups, and that fascism was now the main threat, and that it was necessary to unite and build a united front against fascism, or a popular front, or a people's front against fascism. And part of that was merging all the socialist and progressive parties into a single anti-fascist party. The Communist Party in America, they had said the Socialists Party, the Social Democrats were their biggest enemy. In 1936, they wanted to form a joint presidential campaign with them. And they also wanted to merge all the socialist groups into the Farmer Labor Party at one point. And in Britain, they wanted to form a united front with the Labor Party. And in all the other places, they said to defeat fascism, we need to form a united front against fascism. And that we even want to align with capitalists. We don't care if people are capitalists. The main focus is fascism. Fascism is the main threat. And basically, if you read what Dimitrov wrote, the idea is that capitalism is naturally moving toward fascism. So if communists position themselves as the most effective anti-fascist fighters, right? And if the fight against fascism is led by communists, in the process of defeating fascism, you can have a revolution. That was the theory of the Popular Front. And it worked, right? All over Eastern Europe, countries Hitler invaded, and the communists were the main resistance to Hitler, and the Soviet Union brought its troops in and drove Hitler out. And after Hitler was out, communism was in. And in China, right? Japan invaded, and the communists were at the center of the fight to defeat Japan. And after Japan was ridden out, a few years later, the communists were in power. On the Korean Peninsula, same thing. Japan was the occupier. Communists were at the center of the fight to defeat Japan. They took power. Yugoslavia and Albania, same story. And all over the world, this strategy, the Popular Front strategy, was very, very effective. Now, in America, they didn't practice the Popular Front. They had their own theory called the Democratic Front, which is interesting. The Communist International wanted the Communist Party of the United States to endorse the Farmer Labor Party, which was, it's now, I think in Minnesota, it's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. Now it's part of the Democratic Party, but it was originally a third party. It was like a populist party called the Farmer Labor Party. And the Soviet Union wanted the communists of America to join the Farmer Labor Party and build a huge Farmer Labor Party to defeat fascism. Earl Browder was the leader of the Communist Party. He said, no, we have to support Roosevelt. We have to support the Democrats, right? And the strategy that the Communist International wanted is they wanted the Farmer Labor Party to be like the revolutionary part of the Roosevelt coalition. Earl Browder said, no, we just need to support the Democratic Party. And now the Communist Party later said that was a huge error. They should have built the Farmer Labor Party. The Farmer Labor Party should have supported Roosevelt, but they should have built an independent working class party. I think that's very interesting. But Earl Browder led the Communist Party USA to reject the Popular Front and to actually build what he called the Democratic Front. And that's like a historical detail that often gets forgotten. William Z. Foster and other leaders of the Communist Party actually wanted to build a Popular Front, which included a Farmer Labor Party. Earl Browder actually technically built a Democratic Front. They both supported Roosevelt. They still would have supported Roosevelt. But the idea is, do you break with the Democrats or not? And this period, the late 1930s, is a period, again, where the communists did amazing things, right? Spain, right? In Spain, you had the Spanish Republic. Like the king had been forced down. You had an elected government in Spain, the Spanish Republic. And Franco launched an uprising to establish a fascist dictatorship in Spain. And communists from all over the world went to Spain to fight on the side of the Republic. The International Brigades, they were called. In America, the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, was formed. The American Federation of Labor, the AFL, was kind of a stodgy old labor union. And so, very famously, John L. Lewis, the leader of the miners' union, punched the head of the AFL-CIO in the face and punched him in the face and walked out. And they formed the Congress of Industrial Organizations. And unlike the AFL had a ban on communists. Well, the CIO had no ban on communists. And so John L. Lewis, the leader of the miners' union, hired thousands of Communist Party members to build his new labor union federation called the CIO. And that's where you had the Flint sit-down strike, where the workers in Flint, Michigan, were going to lose their jobs. And so they occupied their factory, and thousands of workers from around the country defended them, and they occupied their factory. In the sit-down strike wave, where workers, it used to be when workers went on strike, they stood outside with signs. Well, the sit-down strike was they had like a sit-in. They occupied the plant until they got what they wanted. And the CIO, in 1937, the CIO exploded in popularity as this new labor union federation led by communists. In Britain, there was a fascist who was rising in popularity named Oswald Mosley. And Oswald Mosley, his group were called the Black Shirts. They were like a fascist street fighting group that went around beating up communists and beating up Jewish people and stuff. And they wanted to have a march through a Jewish neighborhood. And so the communists mobilized hundreds of thousands of people. It was called the Battle of Cable Street. They blocked Oswald Mosley from having this march. And it was like the whole city of London practically was shut down by this rebellion that rocked the city called the Battle of Cable Street. In America, anti-racism was a big thing. The communists became the advocates of Black people's rights. And this is when Paul Robeson joined the Communist Party. This is when Langston Hughes, the poet, was associated with the Communist Party. And that in Harlem, the 2 city council seats in Harlem were communists got elected. Vito Marcantonio was a Communist Party guy who was an Italian. He was elected to the House of Representatives. He was not technically a member of the party, but he was very close to the Communist Party. And then 2 Communist Party members were elected to the New York City Council. Peter Coscioni, who was Italian, and Benjamin Davis, who was African-American. And they were Communist Party members that were in the New York City Council. And the Communist Party, they had a huge amount of power, especially in New York City. I mean, they ran the labor unions. The mayor, LaGuardia, was a kind of a social democrat who would invite Earl Browder, the leader of the Communist Party, to his office frequently to discuss policy. And the Communist Party was just a really big part of the Roosevelt coalition. And in New York City and in Chicago and in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia and in major cities in America, in the northern part of the USA, not in the South, but in the northern industrial centers of America, the Communist Party ran the labor unions, and they were a really, really big part of the Roosevelt machine, and they were pro-Black. The Democratic Party was the party of Jim Crow. It was the party of Jim Crow segregation. So generally, Black people had voted Republican. It wasn't until the Communist Party came along that Black people started voting for Roosevelt, because the Communist Party was pro-Black, and most of the Black and civil rights leaders were members of the Communist Party or friendly to the Communist Party. And the Communist Party said to support Roosevelt. And that's when Black people started voting for the Democrats, because Roosevelt and the communists were in an alliance with Roosevelt. And because of that, the communists, because of that, Black people started voting for the Democratic Party. This is important history that you wouldn't know about. In Harlem, there was a minister named Father Divine, and he was the leader of kind of a religious sect, you could call it, of African Americans. Father Divine claimed he was the second coming of Jesus, and he opened cooperative businesses in Harlem for Black people. And Father Divine wasn't a communist, but he was very close to the Communist Party. And the Communist Party and Father Divine had joint rallies against fascism and joint rallies calling for national health care. And the Communist Party, anti-racism was a really big part of what they preached. And they were also ultra patriotic during these years. And they said that racism is un-American, right? That the communists were the representatives of America's best traditions, and that racism is un-American. That was their message. Now, what did Trotsky say about all of this? Trotsky said that the Popular Front was a betrayal of the working class, that instead of building an anti-fascist Popular Front, they should be having the working class be independent of the capitalists, and that it was the wrong strategy to align with anti-fascist capitalists, right? That instead you should be building an independent working class movement. He called it a betrayal. Now, towards the end of Trotsky's life in the late 1930s, whether Trotsky knew it or not, it was very clear that the Axis powers were supporting Trotsky, largely because that was in their interest, because the Soviet Union was focused on building an anti-fascist movement, and Trotsky was against it. Trotsky had fought in the Russian Revolution, was like a member of the Bolsheviks, had known Lenin. He was the leader of the Red Army. He was somebody who had credibility. He was a well-known communist, but he was against this anti-fascist Popular Front. The fascists started promoting Trotsky because Trotsky was a way to convince communists to not fight fascism. And there are two things that make this the most obvious. The first was the Spanish Civil War. All right, Spain has an elected government. The elected government of Spain is led by communists. There's communists that have been elected, and Franco, the fascist dictator, the fascist, starts trying to overthrow the Spanish Republic. You have the Spanish Civil War. Trotsky's followers in Spain are called the POUM, the POUM, POUM, and it's their own organization. They launched an uprising against the Spanish Republic, and instead of fighting the fascists, they fought the Spanish Republic, because they said it wasn't communist enough. And in 1936, they declared independent Catalonia. And Catalonia is a region of Spain. And Catalonia declared itself an independent workers' republic. And that was a way to disrupt the effort to fight Franco, the fascist. And so, the Spanish Republic is having to fight against fascism, but then they had to stop, or they had to, also fight against the Catalonia Republic. And the anarchists and the Trotskyites launched this uprising against the Spanish Republic. It was a big problem. Another thing is the Trotskyites in Spain executed priests and nuns. Spain is a very Catholic country, and the Catholic Church was associated with feudalism, right? And so a lot of poor people in Spain, peasants, hated priests and nuns. And the anarchists and the Trotskyites would get peasants together to go execute priests and nuns as revenge. And that was awful, because that led people in Spain to support, people that were Catholic would see these brutal executions of priests and nuns, and they would support the fascists because they'd say, we got to stop the communists. And the Communist Party was constantly going around and saying, stop this, stop killing priests and nuns, stop redistributing. We have to focus on defeating fascism. But the communists, but the Trotskyites were saying, oh, no, we have to have a full communist revolution. We can't have an anti-fascist united front. And so you had the Battle of Catalonia. Now, who was one of the people who was fighting with the Trotskyites in Spain? George Orwell. George Orwell, the guy who wrote Animal Farm in 1984. He was a Trotskyite. He was in the POUM militia in Spain, fighting the Spanish Republic. And then he went back to England, and he wrote a book called Homage to Catalonia. Long before he wrote Animal Farm, long before he wrote 1984, he wrote this awful book about Spain. I think I can put an image of it on the screen, called Homage to Catalonia. And it's all about how, it was Stalin was preventing the Spanish Revolution. Stalin was holding back the revolution. It's Stalin's fault that Franco took power because he was holding back the anarchist Trotskyite revolution. This was George Orwell's big hit, before World War II even happened. He was writing propaganda. He wrote this propaganda book against blaming the Soviet Union and saying the Soviet Union and Stalin were responsible for all these bad things in Spain. Very interesting. And Trotsky was in bed with all of that. Another thing that happens is in the lead up to World War II, the Nazis are planning to invade the Soviet Union. And there's a guy who is being promoted by the Nazis. And this guy's name is Stepan Bandera. Right, this guy is the face of Ukrainian fascism now. He's the father of Ukrainian nationalism. And he was a Nazi sympathizer, in Ukraine, who was going around saying that the Soviet Union is oppressing the Ukrainian people and Ukraine should break away from the Soviet Union. Stepan Bandera, this guy, right? And this guy is now a big deal in the Ukrainian, like anti-Russian fanaticism, Stepan Bandera. Well, first of all, everything this guy preached is a lie. The borders of Ukraine were drawn by the Soviet Union. It was the Soviet Union that made sure that there was a written Ukrainian language. And the Soviet Union expanded Ukraine's borders multiple times. The idea that the Soviet Union was trying to exterminate the Ukrainian nationality or trying to wipe out Ukraine as a nation, that is ridiculous. The Soviet Union did the opposite. They went out of their way to make sure there was a Ukrainian written language. They drew the actual borders of Ukraine. They electrified Ukraine, and they built the world's largest power plant in Ukraine. It's just, there's this whole fiction that somehow, the Soviet Union was trying to wipe out Ukrainians as a nationality. That's not true. But the Nazis started promoting that and promoting Stepan Bandera. Trotsky agreed with that. And in 1939, Trotsky announced that he wanted to form an independent socialist Ukraine. That's nuts, right? At the same time that the fascists are promoting this Ukrainian nationalism, Trotsky starts promoting Ukrainian nationalism. Pretty awful. Now, in America, one of the main fascist sympathizers was a guy named William Randolph Hearst. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Citizen Kane. But Citizen Kane is based on William Randolph Hearst. He was a newspaper owner who was a fascist, basically. He started publishing Trotsky's writings. And, the front page of the Journal American, which was William Randolph Hearst's newspaper, was Why the Soviet Union is Doomed, Why the Soviet Union Will Fail by Leon Trotsky. Mussolini was the fascist dictator of Italy. He started publishing Trotsky's books in bulk and distributing them across Italy to explain why the Soviet Union wasn't really communist and why it was bad. And so the fascists really started supporting Trotsky. And the thing that makes that the most obvious was that 1939, the Soviet Union had the temporary non-aggression pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. Which was that the Soviet Union had been trying to build this global anti-fascist front, and the Western countries weren't really going along with it, and they saw that they were in danger, and Spain, the Spanish Republic, was overthrown. So as like a strategic move to buy time, they signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler, which they had to do. It made sense. They had no choice. They had to, it was a strategic move. Immediately, there was widespread condemnation of the Soviet Union for doing it. And you would think Trotsky would go along with it because he hated the Soviet Union. Trotsky actually supported the 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which is out of character. He tended to oppose everything that the Soviet Union did. But at the moment where they're kind of softening their anti-fascism for strategic reasons, suddenly Trotsky's okay with it. And Trotsky actually urged his followers to endorse the Communist Party USA in the 1940 presidential election. Now, they didn't listen to him. The American Trotskyists didn't go along with it, but that shows that Trotsky was very much in the fascist camp. And the only time he wasn't 100% against everything the Soviet Union did was the one time the Soviet Union was kind of like softening its relationship with the Nazis. That's the one time where suddenly he agrees with them. I mean, that's insane. And so then when France was invaded by the fascists, the communists start forming an underground resistance to the Nazis. Trotsky condemns that, and he calls for revolutionary defeatism. He says France is an imperialist country. The Nazis, Germany is an imperialist country. There's no plague on both your south. He's neutral in World War II when France is invaded. That is pretty unbelievable. And instead of calling on the French people to form a resistance movement, he basically says they should be neutral as the Nazis are invading France. And then the other thing is the U.S. Congress at the time was accusing Roosevelt of being too friendly to the Soviet Union because the Communist Party was part of the Roosevelt Alliance. In the U.S. Congress, they formed the House Un-American Activities Committee. And this was before McCarthy. This was the original. It was called the House Committee on Un-American Activities, and it was led by Congressman Martin Dies. And so they just called it the Dies Committee back then. And it was investigating Roosevelt for his ties to the Communist Party. They invited Trotsky to testify before the Dies Committee. And Trotsky agreed. And they were going to fly Trotsky into the United States from Mexico. And he was hoping to give a speech that would be broadcast over the radio to the U.S. Congress, condemning the Communist Party of the United States and condemning Roosevelt for working with them. And Martin Dies was a fascist sympathizer. He was a Democrat, but he was anti-Roosevelt, and he was part of what they called the American Liberty League, which was like Democrats that were part of the urban political machines that were like fascist sympathizing. And basically, Trotsky was going to speak before a congressional committee and go after Roosevelt for being too friendly to Russia. Now, that got to be a bit of a scandal. They rescinded the invitation, but Trotsky was fully ready to be part of the anti-Roosevelt, like fascist House Un-American Activities Committee's proceedings. So that right there tells you that Trotsky was basically working for the fascists. And yes, shortly after, in 1940, Trotsky was killed. And the guy who killed him was most likely an agent of the KGB. Some people contest that, and it's possible that the guy acted of his own free will, but he went to prison in Mexico for killing Trotsky. After he got out of prison, he went to Cuba, and Cuba gave him a medal and called him a hero. And then he went back to the Soviet Union, and they respected him for it. And generally, it is understood that Stalin killed Trotsky. There are Grover Furr, who's a historian who has done a lot to kind of defend Stalin. He maintains that Stalin was killed, that Stalin killed Trotsky, and he's found there are transcripts of Stalin telling the National Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, we need to kill Trotsky. We need to find a way to kill Trotsky. So it's pretty likely that Stalin killed Trotsky. I guess you could say it's never been fully proven. The guy who did it, there's no 100% smoking gun that he was working for Stalin. Okay, right? But it looks that way, and that's generally considered accepted. But there's a lot of things about Stalin that are generally considered accepted. So it's complicated. All right. So that's my presentation tonight. That's what the Stalin-Trotsky debate was really about. And the reason I called it, the title of the presentation was A Debate That No One Understands, is because, this stupid movie Animal Farm, the George Orwell novel, it completely misrepresents this debate. And if you ever take history in college, they completely misrepresent it. People don't understand what it was about. Well, that's what it was really about. That's the second of these lectures I'm giving for an organizational purpose. So I've got a series of like slideshows that I'm doing that are about kind of the foundational beliefs of the Center for Political Innovation and our understanding. The first one is called From Marx to Lenin. I did that one. This is the second one, Stalin versus Trotsky. And we're going to keep doing them, right? It's just a way to kind of review our understanding of the world that I lay out in all my books. So I hope you all enjoyed that. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? After we do the roll call, I will start answering people's questions. Auckland, New Zealand, Kiwi Corner. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. We got a great review of history. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's what we're here for. Cameron. I almost said Cameroon, which is a country in Africa. Cameron in New Hampshire. Ed in Louisville. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Andre in Toronto. Good to see you. Good to see you. Samuel from the Far East. Bless. Thank you. Alex in Brazil. Ryan in Kansas City. John McCarthy in Chicago. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Dayton, Ohio. Brian. Good to see you. Detroit. Anthony. Good to see you. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Scott in Pennsylvania. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Anybody else? Names and locations. We got Lovelo in the Los Angeles area. Good to see you. 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 Tim in Cape Cod. Good to see you. Gavin in the Midwest. Good to see you, brother Gavin. All right. All right, folks. Now, just a reminder, if you want me to answer a question, the best thing to do is go to buymeacoffee.com. Oh, Jenny in Cincinnati. Stephen in Birmingham. Go to Buy Me a Coffee, you know, and send your question. A number of people already have. We got a number of questions that have come in tonight, which is great. So keep them coming. Buymeacoffee.com to send your questions. Now, I'm going to put on the video of the rally that we had. We had a little rally against George Orwell. You know, George Orwell's movie Animal Farm came out. This, you know, the new version of it was released. And so we had, you know, we wanted to do something for Victory Day, something to support Russia and support the Soviet Union and its memory, and China as well on Victory Day. So we actually had a little rally, you know, and it ended up, you know, more people came than I expected. I thought it would be smaller. And we had a little rally in New York City. It was actually Noah's idea. Shout out to Noah. We had this rally against the movie Animal Farm. It was quite successful, I would say. It was quite a successful protest that we organized against the movie Animal Farm. I think it went very, very well. I'm very proud of the demonstration. Yeah, I don't know why YouTube is being odd here, but I'm trying to get the video for you. Hold your horses. But it was a very successful rally, and we have a good video of it. So I'm going to put the video on. You know, we had an event afterwards with speeches, and so I will record. My goodness, why is it? I have never seen anything like this. It is being very odd. That is beyond me. Okay, all right, hold on. I will download it another way. Hold on. Yeah, I've never seen anything like it. But anyway, let me get the file. Let me get the file for you, and then yeah, and we had an event afterwards with speeches, and those speeches will be edited soon. But this is just the initial rally. The initial rally. So yeah, let me just get the video, and we can watch the video. And I'll while the video is playing, I will get some more water and such, and then after the video of our great rally that we had opposing George Orwell, then yeah, there we go. Then I will answer people's questions, and people have sent quite a few questions, and I appreciate the questions. So yeah, I'm looking forward to answering these questions. A lot of good questions have been sent in. So we'll do that. So there we go. So, oh, and yeah, Penny in Minnesota is always doing great work. Great presentation. Thank you. God bless. Los Angeles area. Very good. So, all right. So just watch the video here of our recent rally. Then I will start answering people's questions. So hold on. Here we go.
All over his books, the absolute disdain that he had for working people. Orwell, go to hell! Orwell, go to hell! Orwell, go to hell! All right, today is May 2nd, and we're out here, and we're going to start our actions today by commemorating the 12-year anniversary of the Odessa massacre. 12 years ago today, in the House of Trade Unions in Odessa, people gathered to celebrate the victory over fascism in the Second World War, and they were burned alive by Ukrainian neo-Nazis sponsored by the American government. The Odessa massacre was a horrendous, horrendous event, a crime against humanity. And so we're going to begin our demonstration commemorating the horrendous Odessa massacre that happened on May 2nd, 2014. So we just have a moment of silence to commemorate those who were ruthlessly murdered by the Ukrainian fascists on May 2nd. I'm out here because I'm a proud American, and I am proud that we teamed up with the Soviet Union, we teamed up with China to defeat Hitler in the Second World War. I think that was a great moment for our country. And we're out here to protest because there's a film showing at Regal Cinema that is about denigrating and eroding that history. They have the money, you have nothing. In the popular imagination, that George Orwell was somehow some defender of our rights, that he was warning against totalitarianism. The reality of the situation is that George Orwell sold out his neighbors to the police to lock up people who, in their opinion, that Russia was not their enemy. Compared to the Pacific theater, it was in Asia. China did the fighting. They did the fighting. No question about it. They won the fighting of World War II. George Orwell lied. His propaganda is all bullshit. Propaganda is propaganda. It was the Soviet Union that destroyed the fighting in Eastern Europe. They destroyed the Nazis. It was China that won the fighting in the Pacific theater. Stalin saved Europe. Stalin saved the Jews. You got a genocide under the Democrats. Now you got a genocide under the Republicans. Let's wake up. This system is finished. It's being destroyed before your very eyes. And you can look this up. The CIA literally paid for the first film version of Animal Farm. 1954, the first version of Animal Farm was literally paid for by the CIA. They cut the check because they knew how valuable that propaganda is. For the Ministry of Information of the British government, he was a literal propagandist. That's why his work is full of so many interesting insights about propaganda, because that was his job. George Orwell was a propagandist, and his propaganda was against us. He was against humanity. We're here to reject that and to celebrate the idea of human beings marching forward and building themselves up. Humans are not animals, and George Orwell can go to hell with his pessimistic, anti-human propaganda. Orwell, go to hell! Orwell, go to hell! Orwell, go to hell! Oppress the people of Burma, and who later went on to collaborate with fascism in Spain to undermine the union of people who were opposing fascism in the Spanish Republic. This was a propagandist. He was not an advocate for your freedom. George Orwell should go to hell. George Orwell was a propagandist. In this movie, Animal Farm, that they have produced, he's an absolute affront to the memory of humanity. Russia is not our enemy. China is not our enemy. Wall Street is our enemy. But George Orwell would have you to believe that anywhere where ordinary people take power, that ordinary people are your enemy. And it's all over his books, the absolute disdain that he had for working people. The Soviet Union saved humanity from Nazi Germany. When black people in America weren't allowed to drink out of the same drinking fountains as white people, the Soviet Union raised the issues of racism at the United Nations. They published We Charge Genocide, the great report by William L. Patterson. They called out Jim Crow segregation, and they called out the United States for its treatment of African Americans. Had it not been for Stalin, had it not been for Mao, had it not been for the sacrifices of the Russian people, you would never have had a civil rights movement in this country. Because it so trivialized their sacrifices, because it so trivializes the advances that they made towards humanity and acted like they were just don't even have $500 in the bank, and that's probably a hell of a lot less than it actually is. You don't even have $500 to your name, and that's most of the people in America, the country of total poverty and propaganda. Poverty and propaganda, they go together. In order to keep you from resisting your impoverishment, they constantly propagandize people with baloney like Animal Farm. Now, 70% of the buildings in Manhattan are owned by one particular group of people. They own everything. If you don't own your own home, okay, you don't even have the right to live on land. You don't have the right to live anywhere. Housing not your right. Your right is to just go out in the park and yell. You can yell in the park and you can't live in a house. Actually, you're given the right, a natural human right to land and housing. Land and housing is the most fundamental human right of all. The right to land and housing. George Orwell was a pessimist. He said that there is no hope. He said the future is a boot stomping on the human face. We don't need pessimism. The problem isn't human beings. The problem isn't just that human beings are naturally evil. The problem is the system. It's a system where profits come before people. And the greed of Wall Street and international bankers has priority over human life. Human labor power is the source of all wealth, and human beings can do amazing things when they come together. There's a reason that China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. There's a reason that the Soviet Union was able to pioneer space travel and defeat the Nazi invaders and save humanity. There's a reason for that. Human beings have great potential, and they want us to hate ourselves. They want us to think that we're all just a bunch of farmers.
Yeah, that was a great rally that we did, and the event afterwards with the speeches was even better. Just a quick reminder, tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern, is the first study session of the Juche Study Group of North America. And this is a really, really important event. Noah Shank is the leader of the Juche Study Group, and we're going to be studying the ideology of the Korean Revolution. And it's going to be every Tuesday from here forward. We'll have the Juche Study Group. You can, link there. It's open. The chat is open. The studio link is open. You can join it, and we'll be using the textbook, the newly published textbook edited by Noah Shank, which is called Juche for American Workers. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it anywhere books are sold. Juche for American Workers, Volume 1. And that'll be the textbook. It'll be here on this channel. It'll be on the CPI YouTube channel. So yeah, get your copy of Juche for American Workers. Study with us tomorrow night. It's going to be a great session. So on that note, folks, I'm going to start answering people's questions. Forgive me, I still have a little bit of spring allergies. Yeah, if you want to send more questions, a whole bunch of questions have been sent, and I appreciate it, but more is always appreciated. We're trying to get funds together for CPI, and, we got a lot of activities planned for July and August. We're trying to just slow down for May and June because we need to get funds together. But yeah, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. That's the best way to send questions. You can also do Rumble Rants, Caleb Maupin 22. So, all right, we'll start doing it. First question came in yesterday from Christine. She said, some American socialists and Trotskyists are claiming that the capitalist portions of China and Russia prove the debunked Western accounts of atrocities against the Uyghurs, the Chechens, the Ukrainians, and other groups. How can we best explain that the U.S. and NATO are the perpetrators of the wars against Russia and China to the people who are primarily looking to Lenin's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and equating evidence of capitalism with an inevitability for war? This prevents more Americans and Europeans from opposing the wars against China and Russia, wars caused by their countries and their leadership in NATO and the U.S. I have recommended other sources to the socialist liberal warmongers, people like Scott Ritter, Jeffrey Sachs, Andy Borman, Brian Berletic, Ben Norton, Danny Haiphong, George Galloway, but they are militantly committed to blaming Russia and China for imperialism. For these people, it seems that the definition of anti-imperialism is anti-capitalism is sufficient. Can you recommend any good books explaining the colonial atrocities to the British Empire against China, or explaining the historic British and French aggressions against Russia? What would help turn people against such wars? Well, Christine, I admire your patience because I find such people to be very frustrating to deal with. This element of, well, I'm a socialist, but I'm not like the bad kind, right? These people that want to claim the mantle of being socialists or communists, but they want to be on the same team as mainstream media. And I cannot stand such people. And I have hated them my entire life. I really have. For me, I don't even call myself a communist anymore. I'm an innovationist, and we're kind of pioneering a new movement based on our understanding of where the anti-imperialist camp is at. But I could never stand such people because for me, it was always an understanding that imperialism is the main enemy. And that first of all, first things first, right? You want to talk about Lenin's imperialism and all of that, Christine. These people, even if Russia and China were imperialist, you would still support them as an American socialist because of revolutionary defeatism. You always welcome the defeat of your own ruling class. So even if they were, you would still want them to win. You would still not be supporting U.S. imperialism against them. So these people, they failed completely. Even if there was some kind of way they could prove Russia and China were imperialist powers equal to the U.S. imperialists, you always welcome the defeat of your own imperialist bourgeoisie. That's the first thing. Second, right? They say evidence of capitalism in these countries means they're imperialist. And the first thing you said is that these American socialists and Trotskyists claim that capitalist portions of Russia and China prove debunk accounts of atrocities. How does that prove atrocities? Right? So you're saying that if they can prove that there is, market sectors and profits being made and poverty and, which there is definitely, there's a lot of billionaires in China, a lot of wealthy people in Russia, a lot of poor people, you can prove the market functioning to some degree or other in these countries. That therefore proves allegations of atrocities. Well, that doesn't translate, right? Atrocities are atrocities, right? And economic systems are economic systems. There were atrocities committed by the Soviet Union. They were socialist. There were atrocities committed by medieval France that was feudal. There are plenty of atrocities committed by U.S. imperialism. I mean, proving an economic system doesn't mean you can prove an atrocity. And if they're thinking that way, I don't even know where to begin. The next thing, though, to point out is that you said basically these people, they read Lenin's book Imperialism, but they're reading it in like a nitpicky way. And they're saying, look, there are corporations in Russia, true. There are corporations in China, true. And those corporations operate internationally. So that's the export of capital. So they must be imperialist. No, imperialism is a setup. Imperialism is a system, right? It is big monopolies, carving out nations, territorial partition, and keeping countries poor in order to make themselves rich. That is not the economic relationship that China has with the countries it trades with. It is not keeping them poor in order to make itself rich. You read the definition of imperialism, that's just not what they're doing, right? There may be corporations that may make profits. And yes, these corporations act in a selfish way, but the relationship that China has, it is not in China's interest for the countries it trades with to be poorer. It is in America's interest for the countries that America trades with to be poorer, but it's not in China's interest. You look at the relationship Russia has with various countries. Again, I've been to Crimea, right? Russia has done so much to build up Crimea economically. And if Crimea was a colony of Russia, you'd think they would be sucking the wealth out of there. No, I mean, like Russia, like I've seen with my own eyes in Crimea, how much Russia has invested in Crimea, built it up, enabled Crimeans to open their own businesses, etc. You would think that, imperialism is when the monopolies of the imperialist country go in and put the local economy out of business to have a monopoly. Russia does the opposite. In Crimea, they build up and they invest, and more people in Russia have been able to open their own business and stuff. More people in Crimea. I mean, it's like the relationship that Russia has with these countries, the relationship that China has with these countries, where they build up the state sector, they build up the infrastructure, the local economy expands, and it's like the local economy doesn't become subservient, right? And so it's just that imperialism is a relationship. Those 5 things that Lenin describes, those are attributes of that relationship, but it's they're like bars in the cage. It's not a checklist that oh they got that, they must be imperialist. But I'm telling you, unfortunately, Christine, I hate to tell you this, right? And I admire your patience, and maybe you will be able to change some of these people's minds. But if people are like this, the kind of people that become Trotskyites of this stripe, right? The kind of people that become, socialists of this stripe, the reason that they will never, they will just desperately hang on to this position is because they're cowards. All right? They're cowards. They are committed. They want to maintain a radical veneer. They want to seem very cool. They want to feel like they're smarter than other people by being able to call themselves a socialist, but they don't have the intellectual courage to be on the other side. And if they did, they would, right? And the reason that they've carved out this space to be Trotskyites or to be Jacobin, whatever, or DSA, whatever, they've specifically carved out that space so they don't. You're more likely to win just a regular conservative or a regular liberal than you are to win one of these people. I'll just tell you. They are in this space. They've become a socialist intellectual or a Trotskyist because they want to feel smart, right? And so for them for them to admit that Russia was right, that would be, or for them to admit that China was right, that would be like an ego drop for them. They want to be part of the club of believing in imperialism, but just feel like they're smarter than everyone else because they happen to be a socialist on top of it, right? And you're not arguing about facts with them. They will bend over backwards to cherry pick, and they will just try their hardest to never hear what you have to say because they're cowards, right? They're cowards, and their whole attraction to this, they don't want to be on the other side, or they would, right? They would be on the other side if you know, and you're far more likely to win over somebody who is not a socialist, is not you know, but is just kind of questioning things, and then you engage with them and give them new information. Because this space, this toxic space, Jacobin magazine, socialist alternative, you know, there's a million of these that toxic space that these people occupy. They're occupying it because they want to be there. They want to be there, and they want to be special, and they don't want to align with the global anti-imperialist movement out of pride, out of arrogance, out of cowardice, because they're afraid of really disagreeing with their professors. You know, they don't really want to oppose the powerful institutions of the society they live in. They just want to feel like they're smart and like they are different. And so socialism, calling themselves a Trotskyist, calling themselves an anarchist, calling themselves a Maoist, even in some cases, it's just a way that they can be not at odds with the prevailing institutions, but have a radical veneer. And that's my experience. Right. So I would encourage you, Christine, to, rather than engage with these people, engage with your neighbors, engage with your classmates, engage with people that are not interested in this brand of politics. I don't want to be a communist anymore. I'm not a communist. I'm an innovationist. And the Center for Political Innovation, we are not trying to recruit communists. We're trying to recruit working people that are mad about their conditions. And, you know, that unfortunately, this little niche, this little enclave in America that calls itself socialist or communist, the people that go there are not good, right? There are some exceptions. There are a couple exceptions. There are spaces, you know, there are like very, very, very small, like, factions within that space that have something good about them. But overwhelmingly, the people in those spaces they're there because they don't want to be where we're at. And even if we were able to win them over, it would have no value. And what I would urge you to do, overwhelmingly, I would urge you to just focus on trying to win over people that don't know anything about this stuff, and, you know, and teach it to them, teach them this ideology. You know, that's what we're focused on in CPI. Speaking of which, I will put on a video of one of our members, Penny, doing just that, right? Penny hit the streets of Minneapolis, the University of Minneapolis, with our pamphlet about Kim Il-sungya. And I would like people to see this video because, like, this is the kind of outreach that needs to be done. And I know we got more questions to answer. We got a lot more to talk about before the night is over. That's okay. I'm not too tired, and, you know, I don't have huge plans for tomorrow. But, you know, I really want you to see this. This is what Penny in Minnesota did, you know, last week. She went to the University of Minnesota, and for hours, she just engaged with people about anti-imperialism. It was absolutely tremendous. And this is, you know, LA, Los Angeles, they're doing this all the time too, right? We don't have the same kind of videos of them, but we're working on it. We're going to get better videos of LA. And, you know, this is, this is the kind of thing we need. So, you know, this is our member, Penny. This is what she did last week. I think it was on Thursday. Amazing.
You ever seen this flower?
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, how you doing? You ever seen this flower?
No.
It's called Kim Il-sungya. Find out all about it. Hello. Have you seen this flower? Have you seen this flower?
I think so.
You can't get it in America. Okay. It's called Kim Il-sung.
Oh.
Yeah, North Korea.
Yeah.
It's grown all over North Korea because in 1964, Kim Il-sung went to Indonesia and they were growing this flower, and President Sukarno named it after Kim Il-sung as a symbol of eternal friendship between Indonesia and North Korea.
Okay.
This is Penny Arcos, the regional captain for the Minnesota chapter of Center for Political Innovation. I've been out here at the University of Minnesota passing out these books for a couple hours about the Kim Il-sung flower. Had a lot of positive reactions. Most people were curious. They don't know much about North Korea, but they were willing to learn. It's called Kim Il-sung. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it grows all over North Korea. In 1964, Carl Ludwig was growing it in Indonesia. And Kim Il-sung visited Indonesia and saw how beautiful it was. And so Sukarno, the president, decided to name it after Kim Il-sung as a symbol of eternal friendship between Indonesia and North Korea. And shortly after that visit, America overthrew Indonesia. Hello. Have you ever seen this flower?
No.
It's called Kim Il-sung. CIA gave the information to the military to slaughter thousands of Chinese ethnic people and the supporters of Sukarno because he had been a populist leader. He built infrastructure and schools and wiped out illiteracy. Obama's mother brought him to Indonesia where he married his stepfather, and they were part of this slaughter.
What organization is it?
Center for Political Innovation.
All right.
Have you ever heard of it?
Left wing, center, right wing?
Well, we are innovationists, so we don't claim left wing, right. We claim that we want a government of action that fights for working families so that nations can develop and trade with each other instead of having forever wars. And we can break free from the world that's run by Wall Street and London and have innovation for everyone.
Siblings might support it.
Okay.
Because they're kind of...
This is a monument they built in Senegal for their struggle, for their freedom against the colonialism, when they broke free of colonialism. And they made a monument in Senegal for their independence. They supported the Black Panthers and Cuba. North Korea supported the Black Panthers in their struggle against the FBI and repression. So the economic system, World Economic Forum, they want you to live in a pod and eat bugs, right? Mm-hmm. And they want everyone to depopulate and degrow and hold back. But we understand that humans are creative and they want to grow. And despite all these wars, we have optimism. Mm-hmm. They call them dictators because they have an economic system that is not dominated by Wall Street. Are you going to school here?
I am, yeah.
What are you studying?
American Studies.
American Studies?
Yeah.
So what does that translate to in the real world?
History.
History. So you'd be a history teacher?
Probably not. I don't like academia anymore.
You've heard of Free Palestine, right? Everybody says Free Palestine. Well, they supported the Palestinian struggle against the imperialist globalist system. The ambassador of Palestine to North Korea and his wife were unable to conceive. And so what's really sweet is that Kim Il-sung sent a fertility expert to help them conceive. And that's their daughter, Jendele, which is named after another flower. And then this is about the Iran war. Democrats and Republicans are complicit. And
I agree.
The Greater Israel, we support a peace bridge across Russia and Alaska for development instead of war.
Awesome.
What's your name? The economic system that has broken free from Wall Street, we call it anti-imperialism. The economic system is globalism, imperialism, Wall Street, big banks that are waging all these wars to keep people down and keep it from developing like they're doing in West Africa right now. Yeah. But China broke free. They were controlled by the Japanese invaded, the British invaded. They broke free and they built 31,000 miles of high-speed rail. They have 5-year economic plans. What's happening to our bridges in America?
I don't know.
They're falling apart. Right? They're not investing. Right in that bridge. Right?
Yeah.
The Kerch Bridge from Russia to Crimea, it's indestructible. No matter how much Ukraine tries to destroy it with bombs, it's indestructible. We advocate for building a peace bridge from Russia to Alaska. And that's what the peace talks have been about. And hopefully these peace talks will have fruit this time. This is a project that's been in the works for many, many, many years. Instead of war with Russia, we would have development poles all across Alaska and Russia, and that would build the economy and just amazing stuff. And we have workshops
stop you, but I consider myself politically neutral, and we are Bible students. We promote God's kingdom as the solution to the problems that we're seeing in the world, as far as governments fighting governments. We're all God's people, all across the globe. And so we have a global brotherhood. We have people in every country across the globe. And so we promote that versus, man's government, which is so divided.
You're true. And part of that is we believe that God is a creator of all beings and that human beings have a creative spirit. We want to innovate. We want to create. And the economic system that's run by Wall Street is holding that back. They want everyone to degrow and depopulate and live in a pod and eat bugs. And we do promote the spiritual aspect of human growth. And we do believe that there is a spiritual connection. And we want...
And that no one race is better than another race.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You're right. And so we have a vision for America. We were outside the jail for Maduro, saying free Maduro. And when the siege on Palestine began, no jobs and schools for America, not weapons for Israel. So we want people to understand it's about the economic system. And we have a vision for America to just make it beautiful and everybody be able to get along. And we support countries that are breaking free of imperialism, globalism. So our founder has a vision for America that's bright and optimistic instead of all these wars. We want to partner with that system and have mass mobilization to rebuild the country, get all the unemployed, get all the troops home, build our bridges, build our schools, public ownership of natural resources so we can sell the timber and the gold and the oil on the market and invest in education and healthcare and public control of the banks. Right now we have a private bank called the Federal Reserve that lends money at interest. All these taxes are just going to the interest on the debt. And then Trump wants to $1.5 trillion for war, right? And because that's the only thing our economy is based on is war.
Yeah, we just sent all the money to go for the war, but then there's so many people in debt, there's so many people without homes, without food, and then there's little kids struggling.
Exactly, and that's because Wall Street owns our politics. And of course, the Zionist regime. We have a leader who has been around the world supporting anti-colonial, anti-imperial movements. He has spoken with Putin about the African People's Socialist Party. You remember Uhuru got raided and when Trump got raided, right? We support them. And he interviewed Ibrahim Raisi before he was mysteriously unalived. His family, Charles Finney, was a Christian pastor who was part of the mass movement of Christians against slavery. And so we're spreading a mission of hope. Instead of Wall Street that's holding back development and making all these countries poor, we want to ally with countries that are breaking free and break America free. You can, if you want to scan that, you can, or it's yeah.
Okay.
And we have a 4-point economic plan to rebuild America.
Yes, I have to run, but I'll definitely read it.
Yeah, yeah. What's your name? In the end, everybody was very receptive to our economic plan, and they understood that Wall Street is holding us back, and they don't want these wars, and they do want development. Especially, we have all these kids that are studying and are going to be in debt for the rest of their lives, and they want to study, and they want to grow, and they want to learn, and that's what the human spirit is about. So it's been a great run.
Yeah, that is exactly the kind of work we need to be done all over the country. So great work, Penny. Great work to LA that's doing this kind of work all the time, and great work to everyone who's doing outreach. We need to be doing that kind of work. So I wanted to show that. So now the next question that came in, it was anonymous. It was sent by someone who called themselves someone, and I actually can't read it out loud because they asked about a personality that we have gone out of our way to make a point of not ever mentioning by name. I mean, occasionally something might come up, but we try to do better than that. But the question seems sincere, honestly. I know for a while, supporters of that person were coming here, and they continue to come here and just ask about that as a way of antagonizing us. But I think this question from someone who bought 3 coffees is sincere. And he was basically saying that there's this person who's an internet personality. And he has a certain personality type. What books would you recommend to someone What books of mine that I've written would I recommend to someone who is like that? Well, look, I defend all my books. I think all my books are great, but I just will speak frankly here. You know, and I have to be, I want to speak about this in a way that doesn't, you know, if I were to unleash all my bitterness here, that wouldn't be productive and we would all start feeling negative. So I just want to tell you, I appreciate what you're doing. It sounds like you admire this person's internet streaming, and you also recognize that what we're doing here has a lot of value and is great. And you're hoping to give them one of my books that is like their personality and change their opinion of me. I hate to break it to you, and I'm not judging you, and I think you have very good intentions, but that won't happen. We have bent over backwards to try and be friendly to that person and his community, and they have made it overwhelmingly clear that they are determined to be at odds with us. And this is an old story. This long before, you know, the way this YouTube channel blew up is I fought with BreadTube, right? BreadTube. And, you know, I fought with Thought Slime, I fought with Vosh, and there were many people who, like yourself, you know, they said, well, why can't you just get along with Vosh? Why can't you just get along with Thought Slime? You know, why not, I'll show them something that you've written. And no, it doesn't work that way, because these people are social media personalities. They're not activists. And I'm competition, right? And they are not building a real organization. They're not involved in fighting for people's rights. They're trying to get clicks and views and likes. And so you watching me right now is you're taking something away from them. The only way that person you mentioned would like me is if I passed over dead, right? If I had a heart attack and I passed out dead, that person would love that, because then no one would watch me anymore and they would get all the views. And they would probably say nice things about me after I died. But until then, they're just going to see me as competition. And that's a hard thing because it doesn't match, but it's just the reality. And I'll tell you, I view this YouTube channel as merely a mechanism to build an organization. And that's what I view it as. And, you know, for example, I recently was traveling and there was a period where I didn't stream. Why? Because I was in Missouri supporting the Uhuru movement. A group of black activists got their homes raided at gunpoint by the FBI. They got dragged into court because they said things about the Ukraine war that I agree with. And our government was trying to make it illegal to say those things. And so my organization, CPI, we did everything we could to support the Uhuru movement. Whereas this person also claims to agree with those things. He didn't do jack shit for the Uhuru movement. Nothing. Because they're competition. Because how would that lead to him being more internet famous? And that's because he doesn't want to get along with me. He doesn't want to help Uhuru when they're indicted. He just wants to be more internet famous. He's building an internet brand and he wants to be more famous. I'm competition. And I don't want him to read one of my books. Honestly, if you're thinking about sending him one of my books, please don't. Because I'll tell you what he will do. If he actually were to read one of my books, he would read it and he would find a few good ideas. And then he would get on his stream and he would say that he invented them himself. And he would then use those ideas to get people to follow him while continuing to insult me in childish and sexual ways, while lying about me to his audience, while trying to harm me in ways that are unforgivable. Right? So I honestly don't want to be on this person's radar. I don't want him to know I exist. I don't care about him. This person doesn't want to get along with me. And it's just the truth. And Gabby knows it, and other people in our community can tell you all about it. These streamers, they don't want to get along with you. They see you as competition. And what they do is they take things that I have fought for, things that I have, stances I have taken, that I have been canceled and smeared for, and they weaponize them against me. You know, plagiarism, it's not about intellectual property. I don't claim these people are copying me. It's that they take things that I have done and they use them against me. They use them to try and harm me. I don't mind, you know, for example, patriotic socialism. For years, I said we shouldn't be anti-patriotic. We should claim that we are the true patriots. We really love America. as anti-imperialists. I said that, and I got my reputation destroyed. I was banned from spaces. I went to support the students at NYU who were protesting, and they escorted me out because the internet says you're racist. I had my reputation destroyed. And then these people, one of these fools, published a book on that topic. And I said to them, and I said to them, hey, I appreciate you sticking up for that. Maybe you can mention that I had my reputation destroyed for this also. No, this is a new kind of a socialist patriotism we made up ourselves. It has nothing to do with you. Oh, because, and basically they saw me get my reputation destroyed for something. And then they took the concept and ran with it themselves. Right. And there's so many examples of this. I met Alexander Dugin, the great Russian philosopher who I greatly respect. I met him in 2018. And I had my reputation destroyed for it. I got my name dragged through the mud. I was a white supremacist. I was a neo-Nazi. I had my reputation destroyed for it. These people, they had one little sit down with Alexander Dugin. And again, they talk about it. It's so amazing and it's based. And do they ever say maybe Caleb shouldn't have gotten his reputation destroyed for doing this? No, because that would take away from them. These people, they are just internet personalities. And the language that they have used against me and the way that they have dug into my personal life and tried to blow up stupid, childish sex gossip about me, the way that they have tried to get me fired from my job, which they did, the way that they, they just keep making stuff up. They formed this organization that's not a real organization. And I said to them, what's the deal? They said, we want no relationship with you. I said, okay, fine. But then they told people, oh, we invited Caleb to join our group, but he's just too much of a narcissist. And they keep spreading that around. And anytime my name comes up in relation to their organization, they lie and claim I was invited to join their group, which I was not. And I don't want to. Why would I want to join a group like this? The lying sacks of shit like this. But that's what I'm telling you. Right? They do smear campaigns. They have like a whole bot farm of people that just harass them. And they really want me to mention their name. And that's why I'm not mentioning their name, right? They feed off engagement. So I'm just telling you, it is really unfortunate. It's extremely unfortunate. It's not what I want. I know that I would like those of us that have anti-imperialist views to get along. I really would. But I'm telling you, I'm an activist. I'm building CPI. I'm organizing people to go out like Penny did or go out like we did in the streets. I'm organizing we're having our 7-day workshop, this summer, our training program. I'm a real organizer. And that's why I supported Uhuru when they were under attack. And that's why, we've done so much that we've done, book distributions and national days of action. We've done so much because we're a real organization. These people are not organizers. These people are internet grifters. They want views and likes and shares, and they have a really big ego. And yeah, if I fell off a bridge, tomorrow and I died, they would probably be really nice about me. But until that happens, they're always going to hate me, and they're always going to hate this community. And it's really unfortunate. And I don't want them to read my material. I would like them to forget that I exist. And honestly, since this community started, we have used the slogan out of the movement to the masses, which is kind of reiterating my answer to Christine's question, which is we're not interested in recruiting communists. We're interested in recruiting the bulk of the population. And honestly, I have real differences with dialectical materialism. I have real differences. There are real problems with communism, and the global anti-imperialist movement is not really communist anymore. And we've developed a new synthesis called innovationism. And when these people formed their group, that was kind of a moment of reckoning for us that, okay, this is a sign that we really need to embrace out of the movement to the masses. And we need to just not use that word communism anymore, because it doesn't describe what we're doing. And that word is owned by very bad people. So we even stopped using the word that these people use to describe themselves, right? These people use communism as their label, and they childishly decided they wanted to own communism. And we said, you know what? That's a sign. Let them have it. Let them have it. We're innovationists, and we embraced our differences with communism. We embraced our new synthesis, and we embraced our desire to get to the masses, right? to get to the masses of people and not be trapped in this bubble of people that call themselves communists, which gets less and less anti-imperialist every day. And so you'd think these people would rejoice. They would be like, great, Caleb and CPI are not communist anymore. We can own communism like we wanted to. That was our goal, to own communism. And they can just do their own thing. But they still continue to harass us. And every time they have a little bit of drama in their spheres or somebody's fighting with them or something, they inevitably throw my name into it or throw us into it. And that's what makes me believe that there's something even worse than just these people being streamers. I think there's some FBI stuff going on. I have nothing to do with any of the fights going on in their periphery. Nothing. Okay. I don't know any people in their group. I don't talk to any people in their group. We're not competing with them. We're not engaging with them. We have nothing to do with them. But yet they continue to make up, if somebody in their group quits and gets mad, somehow that's my fault. And then there's a bunch of people on Twitter trying to draw me into it. I think this is FBI shit. And I don't know who's an FBI agent. I don't know if everybody is or what, but there's some FBI COINTELPRO stuff going on. You would think that we're not in their space. We're not even calling ourselves what they call themselves. We are just doing our own thing. But somehow they're always the victims of us, right? And that it's really unhealthy. And so I have urged my community to just don't even think about them. They don't exist. And I appreciate, the person who bought 3 coffees. That's a great contribution. And I'm glad you like my books. And if you want to read some of my stuff, I'm sure you can appreciate it. But if you're thinking about buying one of my books that is the personality of this streamer and giving it to him, please don't. Please don't. Buy it for yourself. Read it for yourself. Buy it for your friend or your neighbor. But yeah, I don't want anything to do with this person. And, all I will ever be to this person is competition. And I would just, we're doing our own thing. We are a real organization, and one of the biggest problems, and there's no way to say this without sounding a little bit condescending. And I don't want to sound condescending. I really don't. Right. I really want to respect people that are new to this, people that are from different backgrounds than I am. But a lot of the younger people that are starting to wake up and understand anti-imperialism don't understand activism, because you can't understand it unless you've done it, right? Mao Zedong said that if you want to know what a pear tastes like, you've got to bite into a pear. I'm very lucky that I'm 38 years old, and that when I first got involved in this, the internet was new and you didn't have social media. And I joined, I was around one Maoist communist group, and then I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years, and I visited countries, and I've seen organizations, and I know what it means to be an activist. When I first moved to New York City, I lived in a basement with 5 other people, right? We all paid $300 a month in rent to rent this one basement, and I went out and I sold newspapers every day, and I had no other income other than that. I barely any other income. I think at one point they were, the activist group I was with was, giving me something, and I during Occupy Wall Street, I had almost nothing, and I sold newspapers on the street. I had, I worked at an insurance firm for a while, and I knew what it was like to take on a life of struggle, and to wake up every day and pound the pavement, and to organize rallies, I knew what it meant to be an activist, right? And that's not something you're born knowing, and it's not something you can learn from reading a book, right? And it's not for everybody. Jesus told his followers, he said, straight is the gate and narrow is the way, right? And that not everybody can do this, and I look at Jesus Christ as a great activist. What did Jesus tell his followers to do? He said, leave it all behind and follow me. Right. He built a movement. Not everybody can do that. And not everyone can do it in the same way. And some people can do it a little bit, and some people can be full time and give their life to this. And there's different layers to this. But I did sell my blood plasma back in the day. What I'm trying to get you to understand, though, is that because we're building a movement, and that we're building a movement, and that's what this country needs, is a movement. It doesn't need streamers. We got loads of streamers. It doesn't need podcasts. It needs a movement. And because of that, a lot of the younger people that come around just don't know what a movement is. And, they're going to have to learn, and we're going to have to show it to them. It's a way of life. It's a way of being. It's the great road. It's walking on the great road and becoming a revolutionary organizer, being part of a movement. And that's just something a lot of younger people just don't know, because it's just not a common thing in this time. People don't do it in the ways they once did. And it's just something we're going to have to teach people, and it's very difficult. And I think part of the reason that there is such a clash between me and them is I'm doing something that's very, very real, and they're doing something that is a form of internet entertainment. And that no matter what I do, I'm going to give these people imposter syndrome, because they're doing a form of internet entertainment. I'm doing something real. And so these people are always going to hate us. They're always going to be hostile to us. There's COINTELPRO stuff that goes on. There's some stuff that is really hard to explain without thinking COINTELPRO, FBI is involved. But regardless, we just have to build our movement. That's all we can do. And I hope that you are one of the people who's meant to walk on the great road with us, and I hope that you will become a member of CPI, and I hope that you'll get involved in building the movement. Maybe it's right for you. Maybe it's not. Maybe you're one of the people that's meant to take up the challenge of history, to walk on the great road. And maybe you're not. But I'm just telling you, the idea that this person will not hate me or be moved by my words to not be hostile to me, that's not going to happen for the reasons I just explained. And I hope that is helpful to you. Next question. John McCarthy said, which one of your books is most appropriate for Victory Day? Well, glad you mentioned it. I wrote a book, which I think I have. Do I have a copy of it here? I wrote a book called, it's called The Battle for Soviet History. And I've got it somewhere. And I actually recorded an episode of Tara Reid's show, East Meets West. Tara Reid and Olga Bataman, they had me on to discuss it, and there will be an episode of their show with me talking about that book that will air on Victory Day. Yeah, this is the book, Battle for Soviet History. So if you're interested in something about the history of the Soviet Union, about World War II, read The Battle for Soviet History and Why It Matters. That would be the book of mine that is the most of interest for Victory Day. The Battle for Soviet History and Why It Matters. And there you go. And John also asked, it's China's turn to preside over the UN Security Council, and they're planning to hold debates on reviving the spirit of the United Nations and defending the victories of World War II. Well, that's really, really great. I will say that China, even the fact that they have a seat at the United Nations is a huge victory. For the first several decades of the People's Republic of China, they were denied their seat at the United Nations, and Taiwan was on the Security Council as if it represented all of China, the government on Taiwan. It was just really a humiliation. And the fact that China, the People's Republic, got recognition by the UN and got to be on the Security Council is a huge victory. And that's largely has to do with Henry Kissinger. And this is an important thing to remember. When you and I think of Henry Kissinger, we think of a kind of a sinister, evil strategist who was cultivated and groomed by the Rockefellers. And we generally think of him being tied to the Vietnam War, being a mass murderer. In China, Henry Kissinger is widely loved because Henry Kissinger enabled China to get a huge amount of foreign investment. And he was the one who negotiated with Mao and brought Nixon to China, and eventually negotiated with Deng Xiaoping and arranged for China to have a lot of American investment and for China and America to restore diplomatic relations. And he largely, for his own selfish reasons, because he was tied to the Rockefellers, who wanted to make money selling China oil, because he wanted to destroy the Soviet Union, and China and the Soviet Union were at odds. And for his own reasons, he really helped China. He really helped China. And that's something to keep in mind. They don't see him the same way, and when I think about Alexander the Great, the Greek leader, I think of him in a rather positive light. But, when I talk to Iranians, they remember him as a brutal murderer and colonizer of the Persians, right? I think of Alexander the Great and, the way that his, city building movement and the, kind of the role that he played and his relationship to the Academy of Athens and other things. But when they, when the people of Persia and Iran think of Alexander the Great, they think of these different things. Oliver Cromwell. Don't talk to an Irish person about Oliver Cromwell. They remember him as a brutal murderer and conqueror. However, if you live in England, you think of Oliver Cromwell as the leader of the English Civil War and the guy who carried out the bourgeois revolution that enabled freedom of conscience and religious freedom and cut off the head of the King of England, right? So it's complicated, right? And that these global figures can be viewed in a nuanced way. But yeah, the fact that China is going to use their platform at the UN this month as the rotating chair of the Security Council to tell the truth about the history of the Second World War, I think is a great thing. China plays a very good role in the world, as does Russia. And I think that's very, very great. Now, the last Buy Me a Coffee question I received, if anyone sends any more, please do. They said, talk about the role of the communist world in supporting the Palestinians. More than the Nazis, how the movement led by Stalin, not Hitler, inspired the liberation of the Palestinians. That's very interesting. The position of communists generally, from the time of, you read On the National Question by Stalin, which was a pamphlet the Bolsheviks published defending their position on the national question. On the first page, it says Zionism is a reactionary trend of the Jewish bourgeoisie. Lenin was very, very opposed to Zionism, and so was Stalin, and that they opposed Zionism. And after World War I, the British had conquered. They had the British Mandate of Palestine. The Turkish Empire had lost their foothold in the Middle East, and the Sykes-Picot Agreement gave Palestine to the British Empire, the British Mandate of Palestine. And the British, with the Balfour Declaration, started sending Jews to Palestine with the support of the World Zionist Organization, which was backed by the Rothschild banking family, as well as Jacob Schiff, who was a Wall Street banker in New York. They both funded Theodore Herzl and his World Zionist Organization. They started moving Jews to Palestine. And the Jews that moved into Palestine were particularly vicious to the Arabs. They would cut off the hands of Arabs, and they defended pipelines from Arab anti-British resistance fighters. They were just foot soldiers of the British, basically. The Zionists who set up shop in Palestine. They set up these little Palestinian these little settlements of Jews in the Palestinian area, and they were like foot soldiers of the British Empire. The Arabs fought against them, and so the British sent troops to Palestine in 1936 to put down the Arab revolts. The Arabs were revolting against the Jewish settlers that were working for the British Empire. And if you listen to what the communists said at the time, they said that the Arabs are right to revolt against the British Empire, and that these Jewish settlements, they're acting as agents of British imperialism. And the Soviet Union denounced the British sending troops to Palestine. They supported the Arab people in their struggle. Now, unfortunately, after the Second World War, the Soviet Union temporarily, very, very temporarily supported Israel. And that was because of the fact that the Soviet Union, their point of credibility was that they had been the center of anti-Nazi resistance. And the Jewish people, had suffered the Holocaust, and Israel, the Soviet Union believed Israel would be some kind of anti-fascist country, and that the Labor Party, which was kind of a social democratic party, was the Haganah, the Labor Party, the Israeli Labor Party, was the ruling party at the beginning. And Israel presented itself like it was going to be some kind of socialist commune in the desert or something like that. And there was confusion, and a lot of Jewish folks who were communists were horrified by the Holocaust, and there was confusion. And the Soviet Union took a very bad position in 1948, no question about it. And I mean, it wasn't just that they supported Israel; they super supported Israel, and it was wrong. And almost immediately afterwards, they started finding Israeli spies in the Soviet Union. In Czechoslovakia, they executed a number of Israeli spies, and immediately Israel claimed, oh, it's anti-Semitism. Well, no, these people were spying, stealing government secrets and giving them to Israel. There was a group of doctors who tried to kill Stalin, and it was the doctors' plot, and they were not all Jews, but a number of them were. And so when Stalin executed these doctors who'd been plotting against him, they said, oh, Stalin wants to kill all the Jews. Well, most of them were not Jews, but that didn't matter. And immediately they started finding Israeli spies in the Soviet Union. By the early 50s, the Soviet Union really regretted supporting Israel. They still had diplomatic relations, but even after the death of Stalin, it was Mossad and Israel that leaked Khrushchev's secret speech and made it public, and spread Khrushchev's defamation of Stalin all over the world. And 1967 was the turning point. In 1967, you had the Suez War, where Israel went to war with Abdel Nasser's Egypt. Egypt was led by an Arab socialist named Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he went to war with Israel, and the Arab world went to war with Israel, and the Soviet Union supported the Arab world. They recognized the Palestinian resistance, and they opposed Israel, and that was a big moment. And the USS Liberty was a ship that was sunk during that war by Israel. It was an American ship that was attacked by Israel, and it wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. To this day, we don't know why, but it was not an accident. The sailors were waving the American flag, and the Israeli planes that were attacking the ship were doing so on orders, and they multiple times said, are you sure you want us to attack the American ship? Yes, yes. And Israel killed 33 U.S. sailors and attacked the USS Liberty during that war. Many people believe that they were hoping to frame the Soviet Union or Egypt for attacking the ship. They were going to try to make a false flag. It was Israel that attacked the USS Liberty, but they were going to try to make it look like someone else had done it to spark World War III or spark the USA to send troops to the Middle East to fight against the Arab nationalist governments or something. That the USS Liberty, it was like a false flag that failed. Basically, they were going to try and blame someone else for attacking the USS Liberty in the hopes of getting the USA involved in the Middle Eastern conflict. And that Richard Nixon, I believe, wasn't Richard Nixon the president at that time? Right? Was Richard Nixon president when USS Liberty was attacked by Israel? I believe he was. Yes, Richard Nixon was the president. And Richard Nixon, was an awful guy, murdered millions in Vietnam and went after the Black Panthers pretty viciously. But Richard Nixon was an anti-Semite. No, Richard Nixon was the president. Yeah. No. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, it was Lyndon Johnson. Right. Lyndon Johnson was president. Yeah. Richard Nixon was not the president. Lyndon Johnson was the president at the time. Very good call. Yeah. So, yeah, Lyndon Johnson was the president. Lyndon Johnson was probably a little bit of an anti-Semite too. He was caught on audio using a lot of racial and innuendo. But Richard Nixon was president after Lyndon Johnson. And Richard Nixon, of all his flaws, there is audio recording of Richard Nixon telling Reverend Billy Graham that he was really concerned about the Israel lobby. And how much power the Israel lobby had. It's actually kind of eerie. You can find the recordings of, Reverend Billy Graham, who's, Richard Nixon's spiritual advisor, the very famous evangelist, hearing audio recordings of Richard Nixon and telling Richard Nixon, saying, look, the Israel lobby, they have so much power and they're out to get me. And it's very interesting. And when Richard Nixon was impeached, Iraq and the Ba'athist movement and China also believed that impeachment was carried out because Richard Nixon was not imperialistic enough. And the Baathists in Iraq really believed that Richard Nixon was impeached for not being controlled by the Israel lobby. China believed Richard Nixon was impeached for being too friendly to China. But it was kind of interesting. And that when you look at like Richard Nixon and Billy Graham, there's an element, of like, Reverend Billy Graham, Noah published this new book, Juche for American Workers. One of the pieces in here is the speech that Kim Il-sung gave to Billy Graham, is when he greeted Billy Graham. Reverend Billy Graham went to North Korea, right? And I mean, Reverend Billy Graham, as much as Reverend Billy Graham, there's probably a lot of things that he did in his life that were not good. One thing about Reverend Billy Graham is that he went to North Korea and he met with Kim Il-sung. And he said, look, as a Christian pastor, it's not my job to make war against countries. It's my job to go and preach the gospel wherever I can. And here in 1993, Reverend Billy Graham gave the Bible to Kim Il-sung. And met with Kim Il-sung. And Reverend Billy Graham was the spiritual advisor to Richard Nixon. And Reverend Billy Graham and Richard Nixon also, there's an element of like, they're conservative. And because they're conservative, they're what would be the right word? They're honest in some way. Richard Nixon, when he met with Mao Zedong said to him, I understand that you are a rightist. And Richard Nixon said yes. And Mao Zedong said, I like rightists. I feel like I can talk to rightists. And that Mao obviously wasn't a conservative himself. He was a communist. But he felt like when he talked to conservative leaders from the Western countries, they were honest with him about what they believed. And when he talked to liberals, they were disingenuous. And I think Richard Nixon and Billy Graham are a great example of that. Richard Nixon believed what he said. Billy Graham believes what he said. What they believe is not always good, but they believe it when they say it. And, a great example, Billy Graham, not only did he go to North Korea, Billy Graham went to the Soviet Union in the 1980s. In the early 80s, Billy Graham, Reverend Billy Graham, famous pastor, conservative in America, he went to the Soviet Union, and he preached a sermon in Moscow at one of the main Russian Orthodox churches, and he came back to the United States, and he was on TV, and they asked him about Christians being persecuted in the Soviet Union. And he said, no, they're not. He said, there were more people in Moscow at the Orthodox church than are at my church on Sunday in North Carolina, and they're not being persecuted. I met with all kinds of Christians in the Soviet Union. And there was all kinds of outrage. Billy Graham was denounced. He had to apologize for it. But he was just telling the truth about what he saw. That when the Soviet Union welcomed Billy Graham in the early 80s, they rolled out the red carpet for him. He met with Baptists, he met with Quakers, he met with Orthodox Christians and Catholics. And he said, no, I don't see any persecution. And he just told the truth. And he had to apologize. After he said that on national television, they made him go and do photo ops with Christians who had fled from the Soviet Union and apologize. But he was just honest, right? And, those audio tapes that have surfaced of Billy Graham and Richard Nixon talking about the Israel lobby, they're just being honest. It seems like people that are aligned with Israel, that have a lot of power in the media and they've got a lot of power and a lot of undue influence, a lot of influence that they should not have, and the ability to silence people and go after people they don't like, and it's not right. And they just honestly said that. No liberal would ever say that, right? Liberals, unfortunately, follow the script. And a lot of conservatives tend to believe things that I don't agree with in many cases, but they're honest. They really believe what they're saying. And that's what kind of Mao Zedong was like when he said, I like rightists. That liberalism is very much, it's a slippery ideology. It's people it's the virtue signaling of, I'm saying what I'm supposed to say. I'm saying the politically correct, safe answer that I don't necessarily believe, but I'm trying to get points, right? So John McCarthy said, I don't like Israel having so much influence on U.S. foreign policy. I also don't like calling for a ban on dual citizenship. The world is increasingly multipolar, and there are many Americans with dual citizenship everywhere. Yeah, I would agree. I will say there's a couple exceptions in U.S. law that are pretty nuts. For example, there is an exception in America. If you serve in any other army, any other country's army, you automatically lose your passport, right? So you can be a dual citizen in Iran, but if you're in Iran and you're of military age and you're drafted and you serve in the Iranian army, they take your passport away. The only exception to that is Israel. For some reason, you can serve in the Israeli army and maintain your U.S. passport. That's ridiculous, right? If we're going to have the rule that you can't serve in another country's army, it should apply to every country. It shouldn't be one exception for Israel. There's a lot of examples like that. There's a lot of dual citizens in the federal government that are elected officials. There's a lot of, there's a lot of that. Now, it's interesting. China bans dual citizenship. And there are a lot of countries that say you can't be a dual citizen, right? In China, you either have a Chinese passport or you have another passport. You can't have both. So I don't know. I mean, that's a whole nother question. But yeah, I don't think I would be for banning dual citizenship. I would be in favor of getting rid of some of the loopholes that exist, where Israel gets a special exception. If you serve in another country's military, you lose your citizenship unless it's Israel. I don't agree with that. All right. So now Gabby sent a question, and I guess it wasn't a question. It's just a statement she made. She sent it via Cash App. She said, CPI feels like a place I can go when the world gets heavy and pessimistic. We may come from different places, but the goal is the same, doing better for this country, America, with good intentions. I'm tired of the negativity and people giving up. So thank you, CPI and comrades, for helping me stay strong-minded and grounded in something positive. Well, that is a lovely message, Gabby, and we love you in CPI. You are a beloved and appreciated member of our organization. Just a couple months ago, you were in New York City, at our United Nations event and doing outreach with NOAA, and you're always doing great stuff. You were with us blocking the No Kings Parade, and you and Ellie and John and the whole crew in Chicago are a great group of people. So thank you, Gabby. You're always beloved in this community. We always appreciate everything you do. And I'm looking forward to August when we're having our 7-day workshop, our 7-day program in Chicago. And if you are thinking about coming, go ahead and register. I know Gabby's already going to be there. She's already in Chicago, but we're having our 7-day program. It's called From a Drop to an Ocean. One can join a movement. It is a really great thing. We're going to send out the national invitation is going to be up soon, right? We got a lot of different projects in the works, one thing at a time. But, it's coming up and a few people have registered already, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be awesome. So go ahead and register today if you can join us in August between the 12th and the 19th. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be tremendous. Gabby knows it's going to be great. She was at the one we did last year, and we're getting better at organizing and running our workshops and stuff. So From a Drop to an Ocean, dare to struggle, dare to win. We have a great organization. We're building, we're organizing, and we're doing great stuff. So thank you, Gabby, for that really great message. It is very, very much appreciated. I guess we'll do the Rumble rants that have come in. Penny said Mali 1 week later. So, there was a horrendous terrorist attack in Mali, where the terrorists, had an offensive. They murdered the foreign minister. It was just really awful. And so Mali is dealing with the aftermath of this kind of horrendous terrorist offensive. So I guess this is a video about Mali. I went on television in Africa on Saturday. I'm going to be cutting the video soon on a TV station from Cameroon to discuss the terrorist attack and Mali's offensive. And so but the foreign minister of Mali was killed, and they seized a bunch of territory, and Russia had to move in and help them. It was quite a week, and we've had, Reverend Dasse, who is a CPI friend, a minister here in New York City, who is from Mali. His family, he was hearing all about it. He was really shaken up by those events. And, so it's really important. And Penny wrote a beautiful poem that she published on our website, honoring the people of Mali and how they were, it's called Mali Still Stands, a tribute. It's about how Mali was able to withstand this horrendous terrorist attack and continue to be part of the Union of Sahel states with their resistance. But they were really tested. It was a really horrendous terrorist attack that they faced. So go check out Penny's poem. Maybe Penny wants to do a video doing a dramatic reading of her poem. That would be pretty cool. We could show that on this stream. But yeah, I will put on the video Mali 1 week later after the horrendous terrorist attack. Here we go.
Emphasize the point in the manifesto, the fact that there is a lot of emphasis on the people. That is to say, making the people the center of gravity. This was evident in the Vietnam War. You saw that when the United States made its military capacity the center of gravity, Vietnam relied on the American people through communication. And you saw that the images of this war angered the American people, who ended up revolting and provoking worldwide indigence so that America could withdraw any. This means that in a war, the center of gravity is less military capacity than the determination of a people to support its leaders. Yes, this explains how the Malian government was able to withstand the coordinated terrorist attacks that took place on April 25th in Kidalga, Savare, Bamako, and Kati. The objective of these simultaneous attacks was threefold. First, to give the impression of a collapse of the state. Second, to try to create a psychological and media effect by affecting the morale and will of the people and the troops, and ultimately facilitating the destabilization of institutions. And these attacks mobilized at least 12,000 terrorists brought from Algeria, Mauritania, and also some elements of the Guinean who they brought from Burkina Faso in order to overthrow Mali and turn against Burkina Faso, and then Niger. But thanks to the professionalism and determination of the armed security forces and their partners and the commitment of the AOS, the project was a failure. The terrorists abandoned hundreds of bodies, including the wounded, and many others were captured and are now being washed up in connection with these terrorist attacks. Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. And then Hempcar said, why is Kent State talked about when this happened many times? Can you read the Ward Churchill quote in comments? I don't see the Ward Churchill quote. I think the FBI fired the first shot. So that theory that the FBI fired the first shot and that the National Guardsmen thought they were being fired on, there's been stuff about that for years. Apparently, it is clear that when the National Guardsmen started shooting, some of them thought they were being fired upon, right? That is clear, right? That there was some kind of, hold on. Yeah, there was some kind of belief among the National Guardsmen that they were being fired on. There were rumors that there were snipers on the rooftops, but there's not clear 100% proof that that's what happened necessarily. But some people believe that, that the first shot was fired by the FBI and they thought they were being fired on and they opened fire. A lot of the National Guardsmen who were interviewed said, yes, we did. Like, they heard gunshots and they thought they were being fired on. There's also been a recording that surfaced with an order to shoot. I guess it's been, for years it has been maintained that the National Guardsmen were not told to shoot. They just started shooting randomly. One guy started shooting and the others thought they were supposed to shoot. But now there is a recording that surfaced where it appears there's like an audio recording that appears like there's an order, like where they're being told to shoot. So what exactly happened at Kent State is not clear. And there's been a lot of legal proceedings over the years and all of that. And it's very bizarre. And he pointed out, why do we talk about that and not the others? There were a number of other instances where police officers opened fire on peaceful protesters. There was an incident in South Carolina where there was a student nonviolent coordinating committee protest, like a picket line at a laundromat or something, and the local police opened fire on it. And, it happened and it got some publicity, but not a lot in mainstream media, and it's not commemorated in the same way. And there were some other instances. There was it in Berkeley. The year before, you had the People's Park Rebellion. People's Park was, there was an empty lot near the campus of University of California, Berkeley, that the activist students took over and declared to be kind of like the Chaz, like an autonomous zone. And the National Guard was sent in, and there was a young man who was shot in the head, who was part of those protests. And the National Guard occupied Berkeley during that, the People's Park Rebellion. I believe the guy who was killed was named James Rector, if I'm not mistaken. And it was, he was shot and killed. And so there were a number of instances, yes, where somebody was killed. Yeah, James Rector, 1969, the People's Park protest, May of 1969. There was a peaceful protester who was shot in the head by the National Guard. So it wasn't the only time it happened. The reason that the Kent State Massacre stands out is because the timing. Okay, so what had happened was Richard Nixon had expanded the war in Vietnam to Cambodia. For a long time, Richard Nixon had been saying, I won't expand the war in Vietnam beyond Vietnam. They had said many times, that they'd asked the U.S. government many times, are you bombing Cambodia? And the U.S. government said no. Richard Nixon got on TV and said, look, we're now bombing Cambodia. Also, we're sending troops to Cambodia. The war in Vietnam expanded into Cambodia because the Vietnamese were using Cambodia. They were going through Cambodia to get from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. The USA expanded the war in Vietnam to Cambodia. And at that point, all the student activists were like, oh my God, we're trying to end the Vietnam War. And then they just expanded it into a whole nother country. And so you had a whole bunch of student protests that really expanded. The student protests blew up all of a sudden. And then you had 4 students shot and killed. And it was right at the end of the semester. And then all the colleges in the country shut down. So that's why that incident gets remembered as if it's the only time, which it wasn't. That incident gets remembered because of the context. Richard Nixon was quite unpopular. The anti-Vietnam War movement really escalated in 1969. You had the national moratorium protests, the moratorium marches against the Vietnam War, and the political atmosphere had shifted and the war had expanded to Cambodia. I'll just throw this out there. I've studied the Kent State Massacre. If you read one of my books, where I have a book called Capitalism Must Be Destroyed. It's like all the writings I put together during, my time at Occupy Wall Street and other things. It's like my early writings, basically. In that article, in that piece, I have a very long article about the Kent State Massacre. What happened was May 1st was there was a national student strike. And students all over the country went on strike on May 1st. It was like a communist, May 1st. It was a strike against the war. At Kent State University, the activist club was quite small because Kent State University, it's surrounded by cornfields. It's a rural, it's not an activist college. It has that kind of reputation because of history, but it's actually, even now, it's not really, it's just a state university in Ohio in a rural area. And at Kent State University, there was a demonstration against the Vietnam War. There was maybe 100 people, and they had their protest. And as they were coming home, as the protest march went in one place, it circled around, and as they got back to the campus, the ROTC building of the campus, the military, it's Reserve Officer Training Corps. It's the military organization on the campus. The building was lit on fire. What's interesting is many of the student activists that I would meet at Kent State, they were convinced that was a false flag because they didn't light it on fire. They were not, the protest march was in a different area when it caught on fire. They were protesting, they marched away from the campus, they marched back, and they got back and the building was on fire. And it's true. The other thing was the building apparently was not in use. It was the military. It was the ROTC building was not in use. It had been condemned. They were going to tear it down. They were no longer even using it for that purpose. But the building was on fire. The ROTC building was on fire. And so then, then they kind of marched back to campus. The ROTC building was on fire. It was an empty building. There was no one inside. It was on fire. It was a building that had been condemned. And so the students, when the fire department came to put out the fire, the students, were angry about the Vietnam War. And so they like were doing stupid stuff. It was a crowd, and I shouldn't say they were doing stupid stuff. They were, being I don't know what the right word would be. They were, they did things like blocking the fire department from putting out the fire, right? To make a statement like, we want this military building to burn down. In response to that, the governor of Ohio, Governor Rhodes, got on television throughout the entire state and declared martial law in Kent, Ohio, and gave this crazy, fiery speech against the protesters for having burned down the building, which it's not clear they did. Somebody did. I mean, it's possible it was a protester who did it, and they clearly obstructed the fire department from putting out the fire. So the governor of Ohio, James Rhodes, got on TV, and he compared the students to the Ku Klux Klan. He said that they're worse than the Night Riders of the Klan. They're worse than the communist element. And he just gave this crazy speech condemning the students. And he then closed every business in the city of Kent. And Kent, it's a college town. It was Friday night. All these people were at the bars, and then the cops show up. The bar must close. And so they threw all the people that were drinking at the bars out into the street. And so after they closed down the bars and after the military building had been lit up, at that point, there was just a riot. And the riot almost seemed manufactured, right? If it's Friday night in a college town and you kick all the drunk people out of the bars and there's already been a protest and a building burned, it was like downtown Kent, it was utter chaos. And they were, the bikers were going around, and it was just utter chaos from what the reports were. So then when the National Guard came into Kent, they declared martial law, and you couldn't have a gathering of more than 2 to 3 people, or else they would break it up. The National Guard would break it up. So every day, March 2nd, March 3rd, and then March 4th, the student protesters, and not just them, a lot of other people that were mad about the National Guard being on the campus, they would gather at a certain point and they would protest in defiance of the National Guard being on the campus. And what would happen is the National Guard would throw tear gas at them. And it was like they were angry that the National Guard had been sent to their campus, and that they were, not allowed to have gatherings of more than 2 to 3 people outdoors. And, they were angry about the whole situation. And so they would gather, and the National Guard would throw tear gas at them and break apart their marches. They did that on May 2nd. They did that on May 3rd. On May 4th, they did that. And it looked like it was like a crowd of about 300 people. And they were on the campus, and they gathered in defiance of the National Guard saying you're not allowed to have gatherings. And this time the National Guard opened fire on them. And it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what more to say about it, but, yeah, that happened. I mean, it's pretty wild. So yeah, I don't know what to say about it. For a while, the campus at Kent State University was trying to build a gymnasium on top of the site of the massacre. And the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Maoist group, was very heavily involved in a lot of the very intense protests to prevent that from happening. The Revolutionary Communist Party in the 80s, they had a lot of people at Kent State University. Now, in my time, they didn't. When I was in Cleveland, the only group that really had a base at Kent State, there was the International Socialist Organization, the ISO. But in the 1980s, the RCP had a big base at Kent State University. So yeah, I mean, and the RCP, well, that's a whole nother conversation. We can talk about the new communist movement. That's another slideshow I'm going to do another night. But yeah, in the 80s, the RCP they had a big base at Kent State University, and that, I mean, the Kent State Massacre, 1970, the student activist group, it was Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, and that it was like the Maoist communist, that was who it was. The RCP had not been formed yet, but there were some other, it was SDS was divided in those days between the Progressive Labor faction, Worker Student Alliance, and this group called the Revolutionary Youth Movement, which was like a big umbrella tent that included the Weathermen, but also included other kind of Maoist groups. And it was Revolutionary Youth Movement was the group at the Kent, that was running the Kent protests. They were Maoists. It was Maoist groups it was the Maoist communist wing of Students for a Democratic Society that was leading those protests. But it was not a big current. I mean, it was a small group, and Kent State University was not a very radical place during those years. It was just the country was in a very radical space. And there was like a small group on the campus of like less than 100 students that were radicals on a campus of thousands and thousands of people. And one thing led to another. And, they ended up being at the center of a world historical moment. And like I said, there were two students who were killed, who were activists. There were two, I don't even remember the name of the other two because they were not part of it. They were hit by stray bullets, the two others. But there were two students, Allison Krauss and Jeffrey Miller, were the ones that were activists that were killed. Allison Krauss was just she was from Ohio, from what I understand. And Jeffrey Miller was from Brooklyn, and he was from a Communist Party family. And Allison Krauss, I want to tell you, when I was in college in particular, I knew there was like a woman I had who was a professor who had been at Kent State University at that time. And there were some other people. I heard really nasty statements about Allison Krauss. I don't know what it is with people, but it's part of the trauma of dealing with things. There was a woman at my college who claimed, it was an older woman, a boomer who had been at Kent State University, who was right wing. And I remember she said Allison Krauss was a slut, and Allison Krauss would sleep with any guy who would refuse to fight in Vietnam. And it was just, it was like, for some reason, there's a particular hatred for Allison Krauss, which is weird. You'd think they'd hate Jeffrey Miller because Jeffrey Miller, his parents were communists. Jeffrey Miller was from New York City. He's a big city guy or whatever. But there's some element of odd, misogyny, I guess, that Allison Krauss was. I would hear all these nasty, kind of misogynist, she was a slut and she dressed it all slutty and she slept with all these guys. And it's like she deserved to be killed because it was really nasty. I mean, it's just sad. And again, I was affected by that trauma, especially when I was in junior high. At the time I was opposing the U.S. invasion of Iraq. To hear my teachers and people I knew say that these people had been protesting the war and they deserved to be killed for it, that didn't sit well with me. And it's as weird as this may sound, all right, and this is going to possibly upset some people in the audience, maybe not. I'll say that people celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk, it's a similar kind of thing. It's not the same, but it's a similar kind of thing. If you hear someone with my opinion got killed, got murdered, and people saying, well, because they had that opinion, I'm okay with that, that's going to upset you. That's going to make you feel persecuted. That's going to make you feel very resentful. And the way that Charlie Kirk was killed, and then the way it exploded all over social media with, leftists cheering and celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, that really is going to upset and offend a lot of people. And it's not helpful. Right. And it's, it's a similar thing. And I continue to see videos of some conservative will be on a campus being a conservative and someone will walk up to me and be like, watch out for the hole in your neck. Ha ha ha. And it's like, that's not funny. Right. I mean, Charlie Kirk, did he say anything I agree with? Not on many issues, but he didn't deserve to die, especially not, you know, I mean, he was just brutally murdered in front of a group of people. And to have that attitude of, well, he disagreed with me, so he's a bad person. And the way social media just sent the memo out to people that, oh, he's a conservative. I mean, that was really, really messed up. And you want to talk about the years of lead, and I touched on that in my remarks on Saturday in my speech, so I'll have to edit the video and stuff. But yeah, we don't need a years of lead in America. We really don't. So don't play into that. That's my advice. But anyway, folks, we're almost at 4 hours. This has been a long stream tonight. Thanks for sending all the questions. Make sure to come to this study group tomorrow night, right? 10 p.m. Eastern on this channel. Noah is going to be leading the discussion of the Juche ideology. The Juche study group kicks off tomorrow night. It's going to be an awesome first session, and we're going to have a great weekly Juche study group. So be sure to be there. You want to get a copy of the textbook. Here's the textbook. All right, folks, we're going to call it a night. So I'm going to put on the closing music. Yeah, see you tomorrow night for the Juche study group. Join the Center for Political Innovation. We're always doing great stuff. Here we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.